Why, hello there, listeners. My name, Justin Searles. This is my podcast. The podcast name, the title of the podcast is Breaking Change, and we've got breaking changes for you today. I was struggling. It's been a couple weeks since, let's see, what it was, version 6, version 7. This is version 8. What's the breaking change? It was going to be something about TikTok. Not that I want to talk about the suspiciously rapid measure that was passed from the U.S. House of Representatives to basically force the sale of TikTok in the U.S. But I liked was trying to think of a pun, like, you know, the TikTok, right? Because it was like such a minute-to-minute news affair. But you know what? I've never even really used TikTok. All right. Oh. Okay, so just to get it out of the way, the breaking change is going to be something to do about the U.S. Department of Justice deciding to sue Apple and declaring it a monopoly that is abusing its monopoly position to maintain that monopoly. We'll talk about that. A little TikTok talk. Welcome to the new TikTok talk. That's the new segment where I talk about an app that I've never really used. I don't know if TikTok existed yet per se, or maybe it was, I think what it was TikTok had acquired, ByteDance I don't know the full corporate history story, so I'm speaking out of turn here. But I think, yeah, I was living in Japan at the time. It was 2019 or 2020. We were in Nara, and I was hearing all this chit chat about the TikToks, and I tried to register with my email. And it said, yo, there's already an account. And it was at Musical.ly, which I don't know if it was that the merger was incomplete and some parts of the app were branded musical.ly, as in, I believe, the TLD of Libya, which I always am blown away when people choose to use what had long been a state-sponsored terror as the place where they're going to trust that to adjudicate the registration and resolution of their domain name. Anyway, it was one of those LY apps. You know, we always go through these phases, right? Like in the mid 2000s, everyone was doing a number followed by a noun, like 37 signals, or there was one in the Rails world, 42 beans, I want to say. I guess they're both Rails world stuff. There's a lot of like the number ones. And then there was we're going to take a word and then just start omitting letters from the middle, especially vowels. So like Twitter, right? Didn't have an I in it originally, or an E, save in space. You had the Pascal case thing, right? Where every company, we're sort of still in that, where no one believes in spaces anymore. And I was just talking to Becky yesterday about how one of my big pet peeves in life is how test double, the name of the company that I co-founded, is 2 words, because test is a word. And then if you check your dictionary, it's double, also a word. And it refers to a bit of jargon that is a 2-word phrase. And so we named the company that. And I've never typed once test double without a space in the middle. Even when I wrote an NPM JavaScript library called test double, which lacks a space due to a technical constraint, I never formatted it capital T, capital D, spacelessly in the middle. And yet, just like so many people fail to spell my last name because they don't realize that it is spelled like pearls, but with an S, maybe 2/3 of people, even people who are my friends, even people that I used to like, will spell out test double, capital T, capital D, no space, test double, Pascal case in programmer speak. And you know, it hurts my feelings because I was trying to buck that trend in naming the company that way. But you know, these tech naming scheme trends of the times are sticky. And there was a moment where the .ly, where it's like, hey, if you could just get a clever domain name, because all the .com reason for this, right? It was a mother of all invention is necessity or some such. Yeah, that's the phrase. Don't Google that. Was because we were all running out of .com names and .net and .org names. And this is before the just absolute meteoric rise of semi-shady new TLDs like .fitness and .pizza. So a lot of companies would pick these like, 2-letter, like IO. I guess IO isn't countries, but like a lot of them are owned by countries, basically. And I believe, I'm going to Google this now. I'm going to remove this. I'm going to edit this out if I end up being wrong because it's too big. Yes, I was correct. Yes, so the Libya owns the .lyTLD, which is always bizarre to me because the most popular link shortener, Bitly, also born in this era, was basically, relied on the good graces of Gaddafi to operate. Another real-time Google. I don't want to be wrong about what country Gaddafi was in. I'm thinking now mostly, oh, thank God, yes. Although he only lasted till 2011, so what am I talking about? I am thinking about Back to the Future with the Libyans and where that plutonium came from. All right, so peeling back the layers of the onion. I know some people really appreciate that I will pop the stack 18 times and then push the stack back to where we were. So we got the ly suffix because people wanted to have cool sounding names and memorable domain names. So it's Musical.ly was the name of an app that was very popular with young children under 13, which is a violation of the COPA law in the US on iPhone and on Android. And you could play music and you could record videos and people did dances and stuff. And we got a bunch of underage kids dancing to music. It attracts a certain corner of the internet. So usage of this thing's going up. ByteDance buys it and either merges it with TikTok or it morphs into TikTok. I know obviously parts of the Musical.ly product become part of like what made TikTok so popular was the ability to remix and so forth. Anyway, all that to say, my only relationship with TikTok is I tried to register for an account in 2019 or 2020. I entered in my email address. It said it was already registered. And I was like, well, shit. I know what I'll do. I'll do what I do all the time because I've got a very easy to guess email address. People register shit all the time. People who make apps often don't include a email verification step before they go to the trouble of creating the account. And so then I wind up, having to hit reset password on accounts that I never signed up for in order to reclaim my ability to register for that account using my canonical personal email address. So I type in the email address again into the forgot password link. It gives me a password reset. I reset the password and then I download the app on my iPhone and I log in. And what I find is, as I alluded to a moment ago, is a lot of, how to clarify, I will say rural youths. A lot of, man, I don't want to sound, why do I care what I sound like? No one listens to this other than, people looking for tech podcasts in Argentina. A lot of little kids in what I would assume is West Virginia based on accents. We're sending video messages to each other that involved a lot of weird music, a lot of bad dancing, and not a lot of shirts. And being in a foreign country, I'm now definitely crossing some kind of state line here. And I'm like, well, fuck. So what do I do? This account is now quite authoritatively mine. I just reset the password. I have control over it. There's going to be a paper trail that makes that clear. And I am now in possession of, okay, just to be clear, I didn't see anything that was literally what we don't call it child porn anymore. We call it CSAM, or child sexual abuse material. There's no kiddie porn as far as I saw, is my point. Because I didn't want to play these videos because they were not of interest to me. But the thought did cross my mind that I had to clean house. And so I looked for an account delete, in the profile. And like a lot of apps, if your app is not designed to be able to reset to verify an email before you go ahead and create the account and allow the account to fully function, then your app probably doesn't include a self-service account deletion tool. And I couldn't even find a contact link in there. And so I was like, you know what? I can't delete the account. There's no customer support for this app. All I can do is manually delete this shit. So I went through the app and I just deleted hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these videos. I blocked all of this kid's friends. The kid looked like they were about 8. I unfriended them from all of their friends, blocked all the friends, deleted all the videos, cleaned house, redecorated the place, the proper profile. And it took me too long. It took me probably about an hour and a half. And the whole time I felt like a piece of shit. We're all made of different parts. A part of me felt like a piece of shit. A part of me only felt like a piece of shit because I thought that other people, if they found out, would think I was a piece of shit. But no one's going to find out. So I hushed that part of me. And then a part of me was just, I'll be honest, a little bit vindictive, a little bit like, yeah, this is what you get for continually to sign up to accounts with my email address. Whoever you are, 8-year-old West Virginian kid, I know what you're up to. As well as against, apps that just let people sign up for accounts under my email. I got a email yesterday of like a hair appointment, and it was for a name that first initial S, last name Earls. It was a very common motif in my inbox, and I replied to the salon, and I was like, I'm not going to make it. So, sorry to whoever booked that. I just don't fucking care anymore. Because I'm dead inside. So, welcome to the show, Breaking Change. Let's keep up the tempo. Now that you know that I'm a dirtbag, it's my inbox, my problem. Stay out of my inbox unless you want to have a question, unless you got a hot take, unless you got a reaction to that just vile garbage that came out of my brain. You can go into my inbox, and my inbox, of course, is podcast@searles.co. Note that if you put the extra E in my last name, it's going to go to somebody else's inbox. So I can't warrant what they're going to say to you. Cause clearly I don't always handle this super well. I do my best. Listen, I do my best to just hit Command-Shift-J in the Apple Mail app, goes into the junk folder. Junk folder syncs up with the Gmail spam folder. A lot of email goes into that spam folder. And it's easier to hit inbox 0 when most of the humans emailing you just go to spam. It's a productivity hack. There you go. That's the TikTok talk of the day. Okay. Breaking Change, DOJ, Apple. Let's start with a little life update. Since last time I was in the throes of a bathroom remodel. 4 or 5 different contractors, 6 maybe. Let's see. We had the tile guy who kind of played point, even though he wasn't the general contractor. I had to coordinate everybody. The tile guy, plumber, all great people, all wonderful. Had we did hire a general contractor to build basically a platform upon which to foist a freestanding bathtub, because it had to be above floor level for all of the tubes. That's the plumbing term, the tubes that involve water. So they had to build that, and they put quartz on top. It looks pretty cool. It's a neat design, if I do say so myself. We had the electrician who had to do LED lighting around that platform, so you have some nice mood lighting for the evening times, for bath time. We had drywall fella. Drywall guy did a lot of the touch-up repairs. There's just like a lot of incidental damage, when you demolish a room and rebuild it from the ground up. And I'm forgetting somebody. It was a lot. And it was like a 3-week project, and I haven't felt really like safe in my home until yesterday. And even then the drywall guy showed up for 2 hours. So whatever. I'm just now kind of catching my breath, so to speak. But my number one takeaway from the experience is that, I knew that I always found comfort and safety in my home. It's quiet. It's my refuge. I think a lot of people feel that way. Whether it's big or whether it's small, if I've got a quiet space to myself that I can retreat to, then I can recharge. But when you've got people in your house all the time, whether they're there in the moment, especially when they're there in the moment, and especially when your presence impacts their work. In my case, I kept wanting to leave while they were here working on stuff, but I kept running into situations where, I would just wander by, check on progress, be really kind, offer them a drink or whatever. And I'd say, hey, how's it going? I would see something. I would just ask. I've gotten much better instead of just coming out at somebody, coming in hot and telling them like, hey, that shouldn't be that way. And instead asking a leading question like, hey, should that be that way? See what I did there? It's another huge interpersonal relationship pro tip. Passive aggressive question phrasing to get what you need. Make friends, influence people. So anyway, I would ask them questions, and then every time, 90% of the time, I had caught something that they didn't see, and they were about to nail something shut, seal something with caulk, put up a piece of tile that was going to cure, whatever, like make some hard to undo change. And so my presence in asking the question at the right time, talking through the problem, offering a different perspective, kept resulting in better outcomes for each aspect of this project, which was the most. Some people would take that and they would think, yay, I contributed. Yay, I helped steer the outcome. But the way that I'm wired, of just wanting to be able to hand things off to people and delegate and convince myself that it's okay to do so. It convinced myself that, if I just trust other people to do their stuff, it'll all work out. But then to see, the handful of times I didn't go into the room over the last month, and I was like, I'm just going to let these folks figure this out. I'm not going to inject myself. There's one instance where Becky had organized a kind of group lunch with some friends. I was like, I'm going to go with my friends to the lunch. And of course, while I was there, I was sweating it because my spidey sense was going off that things were flying off the rails without me. And I came home and all the contractors were pissed off at each other, at themselves, at the situation, because things had indeed flown off the rails. And it would have been perfectly avoidable had I just been there. So sadly, what I ended up doing was reinforcing this lie that I alone can fix it, that I have to inject myself into everything if I want to have a good outcome. And so anyway, long story short, I injected myself into everything and I got a good outcome. So there you go. Bada boom. So that's the bathroom update. If you come visit us, I'll give you a tour of the bathroom. That's my bathroom brand promise. All right. Other life news. I submitted a talk to Rails World, which is going to be in Toronto in the end of September. I did not make it to the first Rails World, the inaugural Rails World conference, which was in Amsterdam. And the reason that I did not was because Amsterdam is far away and my interest in going to conferences is generally pretty low. But I've got something to talk about this year. I've got Becky's applications, her Better with Becky enterprise, without making any announcements of what those apps are, how they work and stuff. We talked about Becky Graham, which is a sort of like a rebuild of or rethink of an old school Instagram profile that syndicates to Instagram. I've got all these other things that I'm building in collaboration with Becky. She is the product owner and me as the code monkey. That's my title. And I am learning a ton. When you have just two people and you're working in close collaboration, and especially I found so in 2019, I gave a talk called The Selfish Programmer that was about what it's like to build an app solo and the things that I learned. But that was dogfooding an app that I needed for myself. So the whole loop was inside my head, and sometimes my computer. And so I was steering my own ship as I went, and I could decide for myself. I could change direction and sometimes not even realize that it was a change in direction, right? Because our own memories are fallible. What we decide we want on one day could be different from the next day. And the nature of consciousness is we're not going to admit that to ourselves in real time. It's like, hey, you're kind of a flip-flopper. Hey, you're, a wayward soul. But when it's two people and one of them owns the vision, and in that case, that's Becky, it becomes my job to play the role of consultant and to nurture and to coax out of her the artifacts of that vision that would result in good software. And then for me to show up and be able to deliver and execute on that vision. So it's crystallized so many great lessons that are applicable to independent developers building solo apps like me, with the goal to let this thing run on its own without needing to be babysat all day by anyone, much less a team of people. Which is the theme of the talk. It was kind of a sequel to The Selfish Programmer. It's like, hey, look at like Rails 7 especially, by getting rid of a lot of the JavaScript bullshit, by reducing reducing the overhead of like the complexity of the build system for the front end assets, active storage maturing, the alternative to React for front end dynamism, the new action cable stuff that makes it easy to broadcast changes into the front end. Like, you're building these like really world-class user experiences with not a lot of code. I want to show that off. I want to show off, of course, the ability to rapidly prototype, cheaply roll back changes. I want to talk about the generally applicable, like just like life lessons about building software, because of course not everyone's going to go and build a solo app the next day. And yeah, I think it could be a very useful thing to share with the community. So I submitted a talk. It would be cool. I haven't been to Toronto since like my church youth group took a bike trip there from St. Clair Shores, Michigan to Toronto, and I was 17 or 18 years old. Blew out my knee, Becky reminded me. And then I proceeded to complain about that knee for, near 20 years. But I stopped now. And she also pointed to my attention that I have stopped complaining about the knee. So I don't hold Toronto personally responsible, but there is an association between the degree to which my knee was a pain in my, knee for 20 years and this bike trip. So I haven't been in a long time. I would love to visit Toronto again. I remember something about Toronto having good food. When I was there, I'm sure the Phantom of the Opera was still playing. I don't know what they do now. I've heard it's become quite the happening city. I hear that with all of the skilled immigration coming into Canada, with all of the pressure on the housing market there, I suspect that Toronto is going to feel a lot fuller than it did last time I was there. But I look forward to seeing it. I would, not to say this is not an ultimatum or something. Like, if you're on the Rails World Talk Review Committee and you're listening to this, I'm not saying, hey, well, if you don't accept my talk, I'm not going to go to your conference. But I am saying that if I'm not speaking, I'm not going to bother going to a conference, because you might have noticed, but I'm a write-only interface. I do love to hear and listen and absorb, but conference talks are not necessarily the way that I do that best. I'm more of a thought pusher than a thought recipient, thought taker, I didn't think that phrase through. Let's see, other life stuff. Yesterday we had a group of friends here in Orlando. We did a Toy Story Mania, like a timed event, like informal, like Toy Story Mania, or Toy Story Midway Mania, as it's known in LA and in Tokyo, is an attraction that's made to look. It's the most, video game dystopia kind of thing ever, because it's made to be evocative of real carnival games, which is something that a theme park could really actually implement, but instead is delivered on just 3D projection screens. And you're in a cart and you move around, and you have like a little ring tosser, like a drawstring that you pull that shoots various items based on which stage of the game that you're in. And I say it's dystopian only because, like, it's for operational reasons that it's video gamey, right? Like, if it was actually you're knocking down plates or whatever, like that would just be too abrasive operationally to run. it's not like each of these screens is changing every day or something like that. Like the ride is exactly the same in every single country where they've rolled it out. But anyway, it's one of my favorites. However, in spite of that, in spite of the fact that I'm just staring at a screen and pulling on a string, which is something that I admit could probably do at home with my various, game consoles and gaming PCs and so forth, I love it because it is, unlike most attractions, which are almost entirely passive experiences. It's just you in a chair looking at stuff and your senses absorbing things. This requires your participation in a meaningful way, where not only do you shoot a thing and get points, but if you and your teammate work together, each stage has like an unlock mode, and then you can get lots more points. And then, of course, that all redounds to a score. And if you get a high score, then it's something you can write down in a note or remember, hey, this is how I did this time versus last time. So I wish that more attractions at theme parks were built that way, because whether or not I want to ride a particular thing when I'm in a theme park, that just varies by the day. If I ride something a lot, I'll be like, yeah, I've seen that a bunch lately. I don't need to see that. Most rides, if I do them more than once every 3 months, I'm like, yeah, that's a little much. But I could literally, like, if there was it's all based on convenience. Like if I could just hop on the Toy Story Mania, like track, like it was like 5 inches from me in this room right now, I'd give it a spin, even though I did it, 2 or 3 times yesterday as part of this kind of informal event. Anyway, yeah, we all did the thing separately, and then we'd screenshot or take a picture of our scores, and it was a competition to see who got the high score. And I submitted my score, and now that I'm speaking here the next day, I realized that I did not check in to see who won. All I know is I didn't perform my best. I wasn't at my best yesterday, but there's always next time. So yeah, Toy Story Mania, it's a cool ride. I wish more rides were interactive. In fact, I think that if you're familiar, Super Nintendo World just opened in LA at Universal Studios. Prior to that, Universal Studios Japan and in Osaka, it opened there first, of course. And I was coming to Orlando next year. And they wanted to incorporate similar gameplay elements into the land itself. And the way that they do that is you can buy a $40 or $50 band that you strap on, and then you boop various things in the environment, usually coin blocks. When you boop them, you get a coin. And there's a few mini games scattered throughout the land that like you boop them at the right time, and then stuff happens in the real world. And I think it's very neat. And there's a companion app, and it's kind of hinky because there's not an account system. It's just sort of paired to the watch or the band. It doesn't scratch it's sort of this superficial interactivity where it's like, yes, I did the thing, but it doesn't give you anything to strive for. Like once you've done it once, you've done it. And the Mario Kart attraction there has a similar thing where if you're wearing this band, you can register when you get on the Mario Kart ride. And then it's an AR experience. So you're wearing kind of what is ultimately not that impressive of an AR visor that will overlay enemies and shells, and you can shoot the shells at the enemies. And what it really does is it like screws up the focal planes of your eyes so that you are either focused on the 3-inch from your face screen, looking and trying to score points by shooting turtle shells at things, or you're looking through the screen and your focal plane shifts to, the attraction itself, the ride vehicle you're on, the props, all of the stuff that you're doing. But you can't look at both simultaneously, and the game demands from you that you look at the screen constantly if you're actually there to play the game. And it's not like you can take the helmet off really, because you could probably pull off the visor, but like it's sort of part of, not to say it's a safety equipment thing, but it kind of is. And it's the way it's tethered, I wouldn't literally pull it off. But honestly, like I think that ride sacrifices from being not a great game and not a great ride simultaneously. But if you put them together, you're so confused and overwhelmed from a stimulus perspective that a game-like feeling happened, and you get off and you're like, whoa, that was really cool. But really what your body is telling you is like, whoa, that was a lot of unrelated neurons firing simultaneously. What just the fuck happened? So fortunately the line's 4 hours long. And you'd have to ride it a few times to figure out like, yes, this is not an awesome experience. Which is a bummer because I'm a huge Nintendo fan generally. Hopefully the future attractions that they build are better. All right. That's my life. That's all that my life's got. It's just bathrooms, me getting back in the conference talk game potentially, and Toy Story games. Yeesh. Last time around, I gave a talk from Bill Gates about change over time. That we all underestimate the amount of, or we overestimate the amount of change in 1 or 2 years. We underestimate the amount of change that'll happen in the world in 10 years. I saw this quote from Bertrand Russell, and I thought, you know what? Another good quote to share with the fam, with the all. Bertrand Russell, a famed philosopher, I believe from England. The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, and wiser people so full of doubts. So that's Bertrand Russell giving a quote about JavaScript. It's a good one. The next follow-up item, I don't know, some people liked quotes. I was like, you know what? Here's another quote. Give the people what they want. Next follow-up item, I received the M3 MacBook Air. It came into the mail. The UPS person chucked it onto my porch. I really regret that we live in an era of Ring cameras and doorbell cameras, and that I can see how my precious cargo is handled in the last moment. Where it's a long porch, I get it. If I was, hey, look, man, if I was a delivery person, especially if I worked for Amazon, and my livelihood depended on me busting fucking ass from place to place and just chucking boxes in porches and porticos as quickly as possible, but also never once making a mistake and peeing into a cup, to make time. Yes, I get it. That's a tough ass job. And it's the system that created is super duper fucked. And yet, as the consumer of the MacBook, when it comes sliding down like it's a curling stone down the porch, and collides with my door, I think for a moment, I wonder what just happened. So anyway, I opened it up. The box was bumped and bruised, but the MacBook was not worse for the wear. In fact, the reason I know that is if you've used an M2 MacBook Air and an M3 MacBook Air and you put them next to each other and you do the same thing on both of them, it will be a challenge to tell which one is which, as predicted, because it's a speed bump. It's a little tiny change. But you know what? I ran my tests on one, I ran my tests on the other, and the test ran 10, 15, 20% faster on the new one. So now my feedback loop is what? 6 seconds instead of 9 seconds, 8 seconds. That's yeah. So I think it went from low 8 to high 6. So cool. That's great. And it'll go up it'll be even more pronounced, I think, when I have more parallelization. Right now, I don't have a lot of tests yet. So I don't know what else to say. I like the midnight color. It collects a lot of fingerprints. I did predict, famous for my predictions. I did predict that my greasy Italian skin would the oleophobic coating, the anodization layer, would be no match for my ethnic juices. And it turned out to be, I was correct. Becky looked at that thing and she's like, that is disgusting. So I've defeated the MacBook's anodization coating. I want my money back. Tim Cook, how dare you? Another follow-up. I talked a little bit, a couple times that I was playing the game Cyberpunk 2077. It was made by a Polish developer called CD Projekt Red. It originally launched in 2020, and it was so fucking broken. That was even after a year of delays. So broken that the Sony store forced them, and I think the Microsoft store ultimately did too, forced them to involuntarily recall everyone who'd paid full price for the thing. I think that they just had to undo the transaction. I don't believe it was even like an opt-in where you could get the refund if you wanted, because so many people were overwhelming their customer support, demanding refunds, because it became a meme that like this thing was garbage and broken. And the reason that was an issue was that the console makers have and I've always had, and Nintendo started this, in the mid 80s, a certification process. If you ever remember in the 80s, the Nintendo Seal of Quality, it just became the Nintendo Seal after a while because they were like, yeah, you know what? Quality's a little strong. It's the Nintendo Seal, meaning like they're paying us shit. But still, like, high bar for certifying a game. And in the days of physical media, it was important that from the console maker's perspective, that they actually certify that these games work and do what they say they're going to do. Not only that they don't break your console, but it would be if there was just a bunch of shovelware, like a bunch of crap going on these consoles that like didn't do what they said on the tin, then that could be the catalyst for another collapse of the home console game market, like we saw in the early 80s when the Atari had so much overhyped garbage, like famously the E.T. game that was rushed to make the holiday release. Everyone bought the E.T. game for Atari and it was so bad, and now there's a whole landfill in Utah that's just E.T. games. And it ruined the whole market until the NES rolled around in the US. So the certification process, like, it still exists, but because games come in so hot now, and because they don't really live on a disc anymore, the idea of day one patches where like, like there's a lot of hand waving during the certification process. Cause like with the way that the market has gone, there's been so much consolidation, especially of the AAA big games, right? There's just like a handful now. Microsoft now owns Activision. So you have Microsoft is one of the biggest publishers, EA, Ubisoft. Is there another even like in that league that does third-party console game development anymore? I mean, Square Enix, I guess there's a couple Japanese brands. THQ, Take-Two. I guess THQ is technically gone. It's part of something else now. But anyway, there's only a handful is my point. And they have enough leverage over the console makers because the two consoles are basically like whether it's an Xbox or a PS5 are at such parity, and they use such commodity PC gaming parts now that if anything, the leverage is inverted, where if I'm Sony and I fail certification I choose to, give a failure note to the next Call of Duty game, then that means I've effectively ceded that huge market of people who want to play Call of Duty to the Xbox. And so I've given Microsoft an exclusive. I realize they now own Call of Duty, so this is a bit of a tortured example. I've given an exclusive unnecessarily, like it's an own goal, to let Microsoft be the only one where you can buy Call of Duty. And so the certification process has become this sort of like kabuki theater where none of these fucking games work on day one. Like whatever ships on the disc, there are bytes on the disc. There are assets on the disc. Very often, 50% or more or all of those bytes are obsolete by the time that the game, quote unquote, its launch day, because you'll put that Blu-ray in or that high capacity disc into a console. You'll hit go. It'll start installing all of that, streaming from the disc into the console's storage device, and then simultaneously download a patch equal to the size of whatever was on the disc back onto the device. And so really the disc is just there to kind of be a handshake. That like you own a license. You're buying it's like a USB token for like a professional piece of software that you would just need to put into a computer to be like able to run, Logic Pro or a fancy like an Avid suite of video editing tools. It's like that, but with extra steps, because we have to maintain this pretense that you're going to a store and you're buying a game instead of buying a fob that acts as a license to a game that can be resold, thanks to the first sale doctrine in U.S. copyright law. So the certification process is like impossible if you're the console maker. Like if you say no, you're handing an exclusive to your competitor, and if you try to seriously certify that a game is good, then what ends up happening is the publisher will say, oh, well, the game's not at all done yet and not working. Our day one patch will resolve all these issues. And so they just take on good faith, basically, the console makers do. That like whatever day one patch that the publisher is going to put out with this game. And some of the big patches are also certified, so there's its own process for that. But games are just too big and complex now. And like, there's not a lot of incentive to scrutinize this. And so that was really what the 2020 Cyberpunk thing was about. from my perspective, as somebody who's familiar with like how the gaming industry works, was the console makers didn't want the egg on their face. They don't actually have the customer support facilities in the age of digital game sales to handle the amount of customer support complaints, because this is an industry that came up through a retail chain, or like, and so the network of retailers, and they'd be the ones. It would be the pimply kid at Toys R Us getting chewed out because mom bought a game and it doesn't work on the kids thing. And then they would either accept a return or not accept a return, right? But like it would be, the pain would be federated through an association of retailers. And now, you know, Sony's customer support, which is like so thin that it can get knocked over by a tweet and like 30 people calling simultaneously, that it exposed two lies at once. One lie was, we certify that like games on our platform work, and that if that lie is exposed, it undercuts the like part of our brand promise that like you're having a pleasant experience. You're not having like the pain of like managing your own Windows installation and all the kind of like driver nonsense and stuff of a gaming PC. Like you're getting a curated and nice experience. And the second lie is that we as a digital storefront to buy games digitally without having the disc involved, that we will be able to provide customer service to you. And the truth is that they can't. They don't have the bandwidth. In fact, for the longest time, and I don't know if this is still true, but in Sony's case, if you demanded a refund, they would have a policy that you could demand one refund for the lifetime of an account for one game. And if you did it again, they would reject it. And if you issued a chargeback with your credit card company, their policy was, at least as stated via a lot of screenshots that I've seen from customer support chats, their policy was, if you issue a chargeback, we will permanently ban your Sony account, and you'll not be able to log into any Sony services. Your digital camera will stop working. And every game you ever bought is gone. Your PSN subscription is gone. The hundreds of games in your library are now inaccessible. So think twice before you go to your Amex page and click dispute charge. And it's irreversible. You know, of course it can't be reversed, but they play a pretty good game. So when Cyberpunk came in 2020 and it was just like one of the most broken pieces of shit ever, of course a lot of people hated the game. I played the game. I thought it was garbage. But the console makers, they had to save face, and the way they did it was they basically threw CD Projekt Red under the bus, or made an example out of them by triggering this auto refund. And then all of the bad press became about CD Projekt Red and how they fucked up this game. Now, the truth of it is lots of games ship broken. Those day one patches are almost never good enough. It takes often years for games to stabilize, but frankly, most don't have that long of a runway. They have an initial bump of sales and then they fade off. So I was impressed that CD Projekt Red chose to continue. I mean, there's some cost fallacies. I guess I'm not that blown away, but like they chose to continue to invest in Cyberpunk 2077, spent several years. Here we are 4 years later, almost 3.5 years later. And I got to play this game, and it really is. I think it feels to me like the realization of whatever their vision was in 2020, and they just bit off way more than they could chew. And it's like it created a world that's a cool place to be in. It's an ambitious game in an era where like there aren't that many ambitious games anymore. You know, Grand Theft Auto 5 was like 10 years ago, maybe more at this point. Yeah, more. And Grand Theft Auto 6 isn't here yet, and it's because building an open world game that's more than like a scavenger hunt is very challenging, and building one that's in an environment that feels lived in and feels believable or interesting, like with decent game mechanics, with a progression system that creates a game loop that's satisfying, with a narrative that has, you know, multiple branches and, you know, interesting quest design and stories. By the time I got to the end of Cyberpunk 2077, I saw the same shit that I really appreciated in their previous games, especially Witcher 2 Extended Edition, which is probably my favorite game of theirs. Realizing Witcher 3 was way more popular. And a part of me got sad, actually. And I got sad because there are so few real AAA games anymore. It used to be the case that console generations would last 5 years. And in that 5 years, you would just get chock-a-block. Every quarter, there would be 3-4 new games. And those games would not only be good games, they would push the envelope in user interface design. The interaction, now we've settled on a kind of standard controller layout for controlling avatars in 3D space. You got the twin stick, left stick moves, right stick looks. It's even the button layout is like, the right on the crosspad should be crouch. Left trigger should be aim. Right trigger should be shoot. That is only recently settled, right? Like there was a solid 15-year period where every game got to experiment with new ways of exploring the connection between what's on the screen and the interface and the physical interface that you interacted with. Same goes for heads-up displays. Like I would rent games when I worked at Blockbuster in high school just to boot them up, see how they felt, see how the physics felt in the game, look at the heads-up display and like how they chose to organize information on the screen, look at how they design menus, because basically like the work that went into menu design was the same kind of work that went into designing Windows or Mac OS. Which are big things that you live in every day for 20 years. And so it was a great and awesome experience to be able to break up that series of assumptions that, like, of course, interface design is like this. Buttons should look like this. The physics of moving should feel like this. Because so many people were experimenting. And the industry consolidated. The games stopped coming out at the same just breakneck speed. The graphics, the visual fidelity hit a point of diminishing returns. The budgets on these games went from like the original like Crash Bandicoot, Naughty Dog's first real game, was like $1.7 million. And Sony sold like tens of millions of copies for $50 a pop. And now here, Sony just released last year Spider-Man 2, which cost $300 million. So like damn near 200 times as much money. And it sold for $70 a pop. And not nearly as many like units in absolute terms. So there's less money to be made. The budgets are overwhelmingly expensive. The market is shrinking because newer generations aren't waking up at Christmas with a new Nintendo or Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis console nearly as much. They're perfectly content to be they're iPad kids. So they become Roblox and Minecraft kids. And then maybe they graduate to a Fortnite or another live service game. And now instead of buying, like I did, a dozen games a year as a kid, feeding like at a tremendous price, like inflation adjusted terms is like $100 for an NES cart at least, I'm sure. Now they can just play Minecraft every day for 10 years, and that could be their whole childhood. So the money that used to fuel this massive industry, it's got to go somewhere, and it's all going towards a handful of live service games and the mobile games that are basically casinos with no payouts for in-app purchases. It's all people buying skins and stuff. Like that's taking a ton of the money. So yeah, AAA games are dying. Well, there are way fewer of them. There are way fewer players. There's just a lot less money to be made in a single player game that is a one and done purchase for $60, $70 that is going to blow your socks off with the best graphics that you've ever seen. That is going to be an awesome experience that you can sink your teeth into and spend, call it 20 to 40 hours and have a great time and a memorable time and feel like you're part of a narrative. There's just not as big of a market for that. And all of the pressures that anyone who's participating in that market is under is telling them that this is no longer a good business to be in. And now that we're no longer in the era of zero interest rate loans, like a lot of their investors are like, why would we invest hundreds of millions of dollars into a game that at best could make 100 million more dollars on top of that investment? So like a 10% return or something. unless they're when over here we could spend the same amount of money in a live service game that. By live service, I'm talking about like a Fortnite or a Apex Legends or Valorant or League of Legends, any of these games, or Dota, like these games that can just kind of, exist for years and years. Why don't we just take the same amount of money and invest in 10 live service games and see if any of them become a hit? And the one that becomes a hit will just, it's the same thinking that led to the last 15 years of VC spending, of like looking for the next unicorn by planning on a lot of stuff to fail and throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. So I ended Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk had a sad ending. It has multiple endings, and I went back, I reloaded. I actually got multiple endings, but all of them have a sort of bittersweetness to them. And I think for me personally, somebody who's followed the game industry since I was a very, very young child. And by followed the industry, I mean, like I have a special interest and a lot of connections into the gaming industry that I nurture because I find it to be fascinating how the sausage is made. It's probably the same reason I like Apple. I don't want to make games. I don't want to make Apple devices. I love to consume them, and I'm very curious about the craft of it. But playing that, I was like, this is one of the last AAA games as we knew it. Until something changes the dynamic of these upside down costs, where it takes 2,000 artists at Ubisoft to make an Assassin's Creed title. And then they try to do it every year. And every year they sell fewer copies because the next generation of kids don't give a fuck about Assassin's Creed. Or Diablo 4. All the big Diablo fans playing on PC for 20, 30 years or whatever. And they're all like, oh, look, they did a stupid mobile game. That sucked. Let's do Diablo 4. And Diablo 4 makes way less money than the stupid, shitty mobile game. That is just a cash-in for selling gems and shit, mostly to kids. I'm hopeful. Like, a lot of people in the creative industries are really worried about AI here because they look at that situation and they think we need to unionize, we need to protect the jobs that we have, for gaming to survive, it needs to be made sustainable. But the path that we're on from a market demand perspective is like, it's untenable because you aren't going to get leading edge, awesome graphics and artwork that is at ever increasing resolutions and quality without a linear scale of more and more people to make that artwork. Because when we're talking about a game, it's like they're $300 million, not because you have a roster of 2,000 programmers. It's the programming has actually become the easy part because game engines have commodified almost all of the aspects of the mechanics and the physics of games, the user interface portions of games. And that's part of how I've fallen off, right? It's like I was talking earlier, like I really loved the experience as a kid and as a young adult, seeing the experimentation of all the set of problems that are now just, hey, install Unreal Engine. It'll just do that for you. The shooting physics, the menu design, the save games and how that works. Like all that just kind of comes out of the box. And so all that's left to do are the lightweight Lua scripting to determine, narrative and event-driven stuff and, the artwork. I'm oversimplifying, but it's really, the art is the cost. The art is what's sucking up all these budgets. And it's the chase for better and better graphics, and increasingly better graphics means better, higher quality assets, and those assets need high quality textures, and none of that shit grows on trees. And so there have been a lot of layoffs in the gaming industry, far more than other industries over the last couple of years. It's been a real bad time if you work in video games trying to find a job right now. I get it. But the situation itself, the system in place is intractable. It's not a labor market issue. It's these numbers don't add up anymore issue because this whole enterprise was unsustainable from the start. And we know it was unsustainable from the start because if you look at the discovery of like the Activision Microsoft trial that the FTC just lost, claiming that it was a monopoly, it is clear that the unsustainability, the writing is on the walls. They all know this, and they all look at companies, specifically Nintendo, who decided, get me off this ride in really, call it 2006. The GameCube was competitive on the graphics front. It received a ton of games. And if they had just done the simple straight line extrapolation and doubled the power of the GameCube or tripled it like the Xbox 360 or the PS3 did, they could have assumed, like I think Sony and Microsoft assumed, that it would just be, onward and upward, and the graphics would always get better, and the audience would always be bigger, and we'd always make more money. Instead, I think that Nintendo quite shrewdly realized, what if instead of fixing our sights on maximizing graphical fidelity and then all of the constraints around it get determined by whatever that maximum is? What if instead we fixed game budget prices, like how much we're going to budget to make a new game, and we'll design the consoles around that? We know we're not going to pay more than $30 million to make a Mario game. If a 4K version of the Switch would require us to spend $100 billion on a Mario game, then we don't need a 4K version of the Switch. Let's make it more portable instead. Or let's make a profit on the hardware instead. Or let's just make the hardware cheaper and reach more school kids with the Switch Lite. And that thinking has proven to be really good because they're thinking in terms of they're starting with the margins that they need, because like their salary costs are roughly fixed in an increasingly digital world. Like that's pretty much all their costs. They're starting with the margin, and then they're designing their business back from what their margin will be. Whereas like the Microsoft approach has just been, well, if we keep on lighting money on fire, eventually we'll get enough market share that we'll be able to turn that into profits. And here Sony is, with all that market share, realizing, wow, the way that we're making games is resulting in fewer and fewer releases, such that we're now in the back, according to them, the back half of a gaming generation. The PS5 is already more than halfway through its life. And they've only released like 2 or 3 exclusive games in that whole time that anyone's talked about. There's God of War 2, there's Spider-Man 2. There's not a lot else. So anywho, all of that to say that when I think about meaningful impacts that artificial intelligence could have in an industry, I think about gaming, AAA gaming. Because a handful of things going on right now in the gaming world are setting up the scene for a revolution in how artwork is created and then how it is managed and reused. Right now, like to a certain extent, all of the assets in the world are just thrown away between games, unless it's part of a very tightly managed series like Call of Duty that reuses a bunch of assets. And Epic has been very shrewd in their design of Unreal Engine, where like, hey, instead of building more and more polygons to define increasingly high resolution, well-defined objects in the space, our new Unreal Engine 5 using nanite technology will take all of your polygons and kind of convert them into, think of them as like granules of sand. And if the camera is far away, I don't need that many granules. They only need to be bigger than a pixel. So I just make those like volumetrically. I make those little circular globs. I can make them larger when the camera is far away. And then computationally, I can show you the whole scene of just a whole bunch of little dots. And that way you're not drawing a whole bunch of manual polygons anymore. And if you zoom up and the camera gets close to those objects through like LOD or level of detail calculations, those little granules, the nanites, can get smaller so that there are more of them, so that those pack in and map to the number of pixels in the display. And that way you're not wasting time rendering triangles nobody's seeing because the camera's far away. And when you're up close, you're getting a kind of like an auto anti-aliased view of more and more detail at a close level. And what that says is, here is a way to have high quality, believable, kind of photorealistic even scenes that don't require manually drawing every single vertex on every single triangle of like a mesa in a canyon or something. You can start with more impressionistic vibes and let Nanite do that work for you. Same goes for their Lumen, their new illumination system that will more realistically just automatically bake in lighting that predicts how the lighting is going to scatter and move and ray trace and all that, so that you're not doing a lot of that shading by hand or manually and baking that into the artwork. Third thing that Epic's doing and that I think could really change the gaming industry for good. I realize I'm now just giving a verbal essay on the game industry, but the third thing that they're doing that I think is really interesting, and they started talking about this when they did the a really good looking Matrix demo for the PS5 and Xbox One X. To part of the promotion for the Matrix Revolutions or whatever the fuck, the new Resurrection, the movie that you shouldn't see. They talked about how, look, you're in New York. New York is New York. Some games, it'll like be a little different. But if you got 20 different games and they all take place in New York, why not reuse these assets? So we'll build this New York. And imagine an asset store that lives inside of our IDE, the Unreal Engine, and you can buy and lease and rent and license assets made by other game developers and other artists for use in your game. And sure, there's an artistic-ness to assets, but if you're trying to make a realistic game, those assets are the hardest to make. And if it looks like a big building in Manhattan, and it's realistically looking like that building, of course, you could pull it in and then you could tweak it. And that's what they're letting you do, is like you could shade it differently. And so the Matrix is a great example of this, because like here, all the assets look very realistic when you're looking at that asset file, that 3D mesh and its default texturing. But what the Matrix does, if you've ever seen the Matrix films, they've got this green hue to them. So they've got a filter over them, and they would look side by side with how another game might light and shade them, totally different. But it's the same underlying asset. And you didn't need to pay a graphic designer, a 3D modeler, for a month to build this building. All of that stuff, this is the trajectory that like the industry's been on for the last several years. And it didn't come out of nowhere. Like these were the periods at the end of very long sentences in the game industry. Now you think about AI and you think about generated images, AI tools that are built directly into 3D modeling programs that, instead of outputting, like Midjourney does or DALL-E does, rasterized images based on the diffusion technique, you could just as well develop similar algorithms that rely on deep learning models and a trained model to figure out how to build really realistic looking meshes from a photograph, from a vibe. There are already kind of, several experiments of apps that are like public that do this. And now suddenly you could actually the only limit would be your imagination. You type a prompt and you get a starting place of really surprisingly high resolution looking textures and a bunch of polygons that are shaped like a thing. And I think that with knowledge work, we fail to appreciate that a lot of knowledge work of users with mice and keyboards is actually menial labor. We associate menial labor with you go to a factory and you're stamping out, a kitchen sink from a steel coil, and it's hot and it's wet and there's a risk that your arm's going to get stuck in the press and it's shitty and life sucks because it's a corrosive, toxic, hot, unbearably hard job. It's probably not super rewarding intellectually. If, maybe in the olden days it came with a pension at least, or a union, or an elk lodge club of other guys that worked in the factory. But nowadays, I'm sure that job just really sucks. But it's so qualitatively different from what it's like to work in an office with a nice monitor, with a nice keyboard and a mouse and your favorite mug. And, like a kombucha on draft in the office. We think of those white collar jobs as being something different than menial, than just rinse and repeat, than rote clicking and dragging and clicking and dragging and clicking and dragging. In part because I think a lot of people who listen to podcasts probably have those kinds of jobs. And we all like to think that our jobs matter and that they're necessary. But, you break it down and, very few things in life are irreducibly complex. Like, to a first approximation, a lot of QA work is just manually clicking through stuff that could be automated. And we did a lot of that automation, and then a lot of QA work became manually reviewing the automated failures to try to figure out what happened and reverse engineer it. But as those tools get better and better and better, it's requiring fewer and fewer QA people to do the same level of work. I think that people think about QA because you're literally reading a script that says, click this, then type this, and then click this. And we don't write scripts like that anymore, but in the beginning of my career, we totally did. And you'd see a whole room full of developers on every release. They'd spice it up by rotating who did which script on each release, And the goal was make sure that I can go through and configure the enterprise system to be in such and such a state. And then when I click this, and that's what the first regression tests were, make sure that this manual script, if followed, the same thing didn't happen again. So yes, automated tests in a lot of ways suck, but they don't suck that much. And that was a job that was like more rote. It was extremely rote. It was more rote than we gave it credit for. And then the introduction of automated testing tools demonstrated just how much of a waste of time it was when you had a program that could do that drudgery for you. In fact, it felt liberating. It felt like there was a story there, right? Like, hey, let testing take the drudgery out of your workflow. And the truth was, I worked with a lot of QA people. Some of them were brilliant. Some of them took to this stuff. Some of them decided to become quality engineers, a QE role, and they started building these tests. And some of them, they just really liked manually following scripts and clicking on stuff. And they felt threatened, reasonably threatened by that change. And some of them, they'd move on to other things because those jobs disappeared. And it's sad, but on my deathbed, I'm not going to be super sad that a program got written that resulted in people not having to manually click add account and then change account region and then change account region back and then make sure that transactions can still be moved between the two accounts. Hopefully the person finds more enriching work and hopefully opportunities emerge for that person. But at the end of the day, it becomes society's problem to figure out whether that's a universal basic income or whatever it is, or a social safety net or a retraining program or something. I think that society should do a much, much better job of catching people who fall through the cracks. But whining about it isn't going to prevent technology from exposing those cracks. So when I think about AI and I think about writing a prompt and I think about hey, you could just invent a video game out of thin air with just a handful of, overpaid game designers and a dime bag of weed and a weekend. And you could do as much as a team of 30 modelers might have done in a month. Look, I'm not in the industry. I don't know if that is literally true. I don't know if it'll ever be true. But what I do know is that investors and executives at video game companies believe it to be true. So even if they end up going down this route, they seem hell-bent on it. And even if they end up spending 10 times as much money hiring everybody back to fix all the shitty AI stuff, that seems like where the next play is. And as somebody who likes to consume video games, I am honestly kind of hopeful that it works out, because the alternative is we just don't get AAA games with, high quality graphics and solo narrative experiences anymore. And that would be a bummer, because I personally kind of don't like all the shitty pixel art indie games, because I don't like games for games. I like games for the story. I like games for the kick-ass graphics. I like games for the delivering user interface experiences that I can't get elsewhere, that push the envelope in ways that I've never seen. I don't like games that are just, I like them. I play a ton of games and tons of different kinds of games, but end of the day, you make a slightly better Mario game, I'm going to play it. I'm going to be that is indeed a slightly better Mario game, but it doesn't move me the way that the first time that I saw Ocarina of Time, the Zelda game in 1998, how that blew my pants off for how I was now exploring a 3D world Or Breath of the Wild, even in 2016, on an underpowered console like the Switch, the way that like you could really, really explore this entire universe to an extent that you couldn't before. Or the first time I played Skyrim VR, and I'm really like, I am a Nord in the, swinging my sword and stuff, and then realizing, boy, my arms are getting tired, so maybe I'll just be an archer this time. Those experiences were super meaningful to me on an emotional level because they let me experience a new world and unlocked a way to escape into another mode of being, another persona, another story, and truly immerse myself in it. But, our brains are smart, and you do that at a certain level of graphical fidelity. You do that at a certain level of immersion, a certain amount of controller resolution fidelity, and you just keep doing the same thing over and over again, and you become numb to the stimulus, and so you need something even better, even more immersive, even more all-encompassing, and I'm hooked on it, but I was anyway. I haven't experienced it in so long, and anyway, all that to say, Cyberpunk was a bit of a swan song for that because it didn't rock my world like to that extent. It just reminded me that was why I liked AAA games in the first place. And it's been a long fucking time since anything new has been interesting. It's really like we're in the third generation in a row now where it's like the Xbox 360 was kind of like the last one that like I reliably had that experience. PS4 and Xbox One era was kind of meh. The PS5, Xbox One X era is kind of meh. It's all diminishing returns. It's just something's got to give. So that's my hopeful AI moment of the day. I'm curious to see how this plays out because the industry as it stands is just utterly unsustainable. And Nintendo might be the only one left standing making any kind of profit 5 years from now if things don't turn around somehow. So that's it for follow-up. Let's take a moment to reflect. All right. Well, that wraps follow-up. Let's move on to the pun. Every week, as is your birthright, you are entitled to one free pun from one Aaron Tenderlove Patterson. Aaron offers this as a free service to you as listeners of the podcast. And this morning, I did a bad thing because he is 3 hours behind me, living in Pacific time. What time did I text him? I was like, oh shit, I need a pun. I texted him that at the equivalent of 5:28 a.m. his time. And he had the temerity to not respond to me until the equivalent of 8:17 a.m. his time, which granted was earlier than 8:28, which is when I sent it in my time. But that 3 hours there, that was real tight. That was like, oh shoot, maybe I can't do the podcast because my promise to you is that the pun is the fulcrum of this show. And if I'm not ranking the puns, what am I even doing here? So let's see what Aaron's got for us. I gave him a couple prompts. I'm going to peel back the invisible ink coating. All right. It's not so bad. The pun reads, I loved playing AAA games as a kid, but replacing the batteries got real expensive. So he knew I was talking about games, and he kind of hit it right on the money. Version 8. I loved playing AAA games as a kid, but replacing the batteries got real expensive. That is version 8's pun for this March 23rd, 2024. That's one of our better ones, It's currently sitting there at the bottom of the list. I got to figure out how high up do I drag it. It's sort of like one of those old Price is Right games. Do, like a song's playing. I got to hit stop at the right moment or the yodeler falls off the hill. Boy. I think this might be our number 2 pun. I think this is better than... I think this is better than the inaugural breaking change. Sorry, I don't carry cash. Is it? It's right up there. Boy, I'm going to say maybe it doesn't quite hit that mark. I'm going to say it's 3rd place. So just behind the breaking change pun. It's very good work, Aaron. And on very short notice, I might add. But it's still ahead of, I wonder what tapas restaurants have to say about this EU App Store ruling. And it is definitively better than that one. So I feel pretty good. Stack ranking things is fun. All right. So thus concludes the pun. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. I will reflect on it fondly later on when I review the list, as I do. Every night I pour a whiskey. I read the list to myself, and it comforts me in this cruel world of everyone taking themselves too seriously. All right, we got some news. Only 2 pieces of news today. I note that I have 14 bullet points about one of the pieces of news, so I'll start with the other one. Ubisoft, aforementioned of the remaining few independent game publishers, I want to make sure that this was actually, NVIDIA had a big event where they were showing off primarily, like they filled a stadium because people want to hear about AI and whatever's going to follow up the H100 chip. And it's, they're $1 trillion company now, and they called the shot, man. Like they are exactly where a company would want to be to corner they're in the eye of the storm of all of the money in tech right now. So kudos to the NVIDIA CEO guy, because he's been too old and too uncool to wear a black leather jacket in presentations for many years. But he is actually finally that level of rock star. I say that forgetting his name. Jensen Huang. And a co-founder. I should know that. And he's not that old. He's 60. But the fact he's always got the leather jacket on, it used to make me think, man, that guy, he's a little out of touch. But now he's literally filling a stadium that Justin Timberlake is also filling later this month. So I think he can wear whatever he damn well pleases. And we just talked a bunch about gaming. I hope that you didn't mind the conversation about gaming. I hope you found it enriching and interesting. I hope you found it, if you know a lot about gaming, infuriating because I didn't agree with you. Whatever you felt, email me, podcast@searles.co. I want to hear your feelings. A lot of people ask questions. Not a lot of people tell me their feelings. And I'm telling you my feelings. So I think it's only fair. Anywho, games are now second fiddle. Could barely get it out. Second fiddle at NVIDIA's show. It used to be like they're a GPU company. And the only reason you would need a GPU is to play AAA games. And the only reason you would need the new one is those AAA games are even AAA-ier. And the funny thing about it is, right, like they saw those diminishing returns too. So they're like, you know what we're going to do is we're going to like build server farms, and we're going to build massive fucking server sized computers that live in the trunk of electric cars. And we're going to power an operating system stack for those electric cars. And we're going to use Unreal Engine to draw really cool looking models on those cars. And then we're going to invest in AI circuitry, and originally I think a lot of that came from a desire to be a player in the autonomous driving space, but it's sure as shit paid off now. So most of their stuff is about their AI and their cloud stuff, and their, that's where their bread is being buttered, both in the products that they're selling, but also it's what the investors want to hear. So games are now short shrift, which is a hard phrase to say after you've been talking for a while. But one thing that they did show off gaming wise was the use of AI in the generation of conversation dialogue with NPCs or non-player characters in video games. So if you've ever seen a AAA game or a modern 3D game that involves any amount of dialogue with any amount of between you, the player, and a non-player character, you are probably familiar with here's a rectangle at the bottom of the screen and I have 3 dialogue options and I could say any of these 3 different things, and there's the obviously good one and the obviously asshole one, and then there's the illustrative questions underneath that maybe don't move the dialogue forward, like, in a branching way, but might like provide some additional color, and I can choose to ask those or not, and it doesn't really matter. Like if you've played the game of exploring dialogue trees interactively in games, which is an art that has been honed, frankly, for 30, 40 fucking years now. And even with the advent of voice acting and motion capture of the delivery of dialogue, the fundamentals haven't changed. It's just like an IVR script when you call into a support number. It's like, what do you need? Press 1 for shipping, press 2 for returns. Except instead of getting delivered to a different service department, the NPC is doling out bits of exposition, and in turn that updates your quest tracker, and then that in turn updates what direction the arrow is pointing for you to go to your next task. Now, as the industry moved forward, it got the attention of like Last of Us comes out, right? Like a narrative masterpiece, or Uncharted games were similar. A lot of Naughty Dog games got a lot of attention for being, they sure seem quite movie-like. But then you had people like the late Roger Ebert be like, games aren't art. They can't be art because you can't deliver a singular vision. You can't leave an authorial brushstroke in an interactive medium. You just can't. Now, was he an old fuddy-duddy? Like, also, yes. Like, I think you totally can. In fact, some games are so not interactive that you might say that all they fucking are is art. And the further we've gotten down this path, where game development is so much more expensive, like suddenly these dialogue trees aren't quite as branching as they used to be. In fact, I'm quite literally just watching a CG movie right now for 10 minutes in between little like 5-minute jaunts of either shooting people or sneaking by people. That is most of the game industry. Well, one of the things that stands to upend this that was demoed at NVIDIA's keynote event called Neo NPCs, which is a term that Ubisoft has branded for, and they did a demo, and I won't talk about the game in particular. It's just an experimental sort of thing. It's Ubisoft it's so underwater anyway that I doubt anything like this is going to come out from them. But the demo, you're looking at what looks like a game world. You're talking to a character in that game. You need to learn certain things from him, and you need to make him feel good about you. You got those little kind of quest criteria up in the corner of the screen. So instead of choosing from a dialogue box what to say, you have a microphone and you just talk to it. And you can say, hey, and he's trying to sign you up for the resistance. And like the reporter at The Verge, and I'll share this link. He's like, I don't know, man. Like, what's the point of fighting for my family if I just, attract the bad guys back to my house? And he's like, well, you got to do it anyway. And like in a very ChatGPT 4 sort of style, there's like thought bubble, and then the NPC starts talking. And because they're all AI generated voice work, another big part of the gaming industry that is rightfully worried are voice actors, because this wouldn't be possible with a traditional voice actor in a sound booth. It would react to the prompt, and maybe the reaction to the prompt would just be a back and forth, and it wouldn't flick either of those, find out this information or make this person like you, quest objectives. Maybe it's just a conversation. And so there's several pieces of back and forth, and clearly like the reporter, and I'm glad they did so, is trying to test the fences a little bit, see what the guy, like what the boundaries are and how this person will reply. And I watched it, and I was on a technical level kind of impressed. It reminded me of the Dreamcast game Seaman, which shipped with a microphone that plugged into the VMU socket, the memory card holder of the Dreamcast controller. This is in 99, 2000. And you would talk in and converse with this like weird anglerfish looking thing with a human face. Except, of course, this is a few notches more advanced than that. And it made me kind of feel like, yeah, Roger Ebert in this world, had he lived to see this, he'd kind of have a point. Because no one's writing this dialogue. What's happening is a major LLM, probably GPT-4, is leaning on its training data, as well as a paragraph-long description of what this persona is like. This is their gender, this is their backstory, this is what they want in this particular moment. And all of those, whatever is literally said, as well as whatever that kind of front matter of prompt text is just going through the same machine. And then whatever comes out is what comes out. And part of that output is probably, hey, if you're feeling like, higher than 80% affinity, let me know and I'll check this box and I'll call that quest complete, right? At this point, we're not talking about true narrative. No one's writing the dialogue lines. So like you couldn't really credit a writer with having written a script. You're engaged in like gamified chatbot. Like you're trying to leverage a conversation with a chatbot to overcome certain gates in the game to move the quote unquote story along and check things off your task list. When I'm engaged with the game and I'm listening to a character and I'm choosing what to say to the character, I believe that it is important for me to give a shit about that game to know that somebody actually wrote the line and like meant to say that, and that in saying that it was meaningful. And maybe if it was well written, whatever they shared will be called back to later on in the game. Maybe it'll tie into a theme that I should be chewing on or strike a chord emotionally that if it were intentionally designed, I might be feeling as I move into the next sequence, such that there's an intentionality. There's a hand moving me through and using the interactivity to enhance an immersive narrative experience. That is what we're all shooting for, I think, when we interface with these sorts of AAA games. If I'm just talking to an NPC and I just know it's an LLM and I know it's going to say shit to me, I'm like, hey, so tell me about your sister, man. And he makes up something about a sister. I know that I'll never get a callback about that sister in the future unless I happen to ask it about a sister, in which case, like, all the details will be different because it won't really know. It'll just, the hair color will be different. The name will be different. The story will be different. She survived instead of she died, because we know how LLM, large language models, work. Is they only can hold a certain amount of context in their head. And even though that context is all the way up to like a couple 100,000 tokens, which is, really kind of phonemes, like portions of a word, that's not enough to fit in everything that you've ever said, everything that you've ever heard. And so it means that you're kind of hitting the reset button every few minutes of dialogue here. It's not long enough to hold a real conversation. It's certainly not long enough for something that you heard in hour 10 of this game to come back in hour 20. And at that point, I'm back to my favorite phrase of what are we even doing here? Like I'm talking to a thing with my mouth hole, probably late at night, probably just wanted to play a dumb game, hoping to get some kind of useful or interesting or stimulating, entertainment from it. But now I have to do the work to make my own fun by fucking around with these chatbots so that I can make Billy like me, so that I can go into the next room, so that I can make Sally angry, so that I can trigger the next cutscene, so that I can shoot the boss. Like, this is an experimental prototype of a thing that is technically feasible. There's probably a way to do this, but just plugging it into our existing what do you call it? Prototype or prototypical, AAA game structure of, the usually kind of dissonant, like if you remember the phrase ludonarrative dissonance, where like, you see a cutscene and then the cutscene's like, oh man, like I could never shoot a guy, man. I just killed this man. Oh my God, I'm overwrecked with emotion. And then the cutscene ends and then you go into a hallway and you shoot 500 other fuckers. And then the next cutscene is like, man, I can't believe I saw Billy Bob die at my hands. And it's like, you just mowed down hundreds of people, right? Like, so these games always existed in a sort of nonsense. But the gaminess bits were like a real game. And that was sort of the suspension of disbelief would happen there. But if you're asking me to suspend my disbelief, both when I'm doing the hallway shooter and the third person cover shooting to like, mow down, wave after wave of whoever the fuck. And then I go into a cutscene, instead of feeling any sort of reprieve, like, yes, I'm now back hearing what the director of the game is trying to get across here. Instead, I'm just playing a different game, which is like I'm playing Seaman. I'm trying to like make friends with a computer that's going to forget me in 200,000 characters as the context window shifts. So that's a thing. That's news. I don't know where that's going to go. I'm kind of curious. So you may have heard I received many text messages. I received many text messages from the green bubbles in my life. The Department of Justice sued Apple, and they all thought that I'd have a strong take. I learned when I was talking about the Digital Markets Act, the EU thing, on this very program, that it's not really fun to dive into the weeds of the policy stuff and to put myself in the position of saying, well, this should be that way, or that should be this way, or, oh, this is structured badly, or like this is this person's right and this person's wrong. Because the truth is we live in a post-fact era. And I can tell you my opinion. I read the first 20 pages of the DOJ 88-page complaint. It read weirdly like an editorial. It was like extremely informally written. The press release and the press conference that followed the release of the complaint. You got Merrick Garland up there. He's flanked by other DOJ officials, probably a couple attorneys general from, states in that region who joined the suit. And he's saying bad things about Apple. They did this, they did this. And some of these things, like in the complaint that were said, are very literally true. Some of them are definitely a stretch. But in this day and age, you could kind of just, in the post, call it 2015 era, especially with the current composition of the federal courts, depending on which, circuit you file in, and depending on which judge you draw, and whether it's an individual judge or a 3-judge panel or if it's en banc or whatever, like, you could write on a napkin, Apple good, Apple bad, beat your chest a little bit and just put some nonsense. And it's a fucking dice roll what kind of ruling you're going to get. And that used to be true for certain categories of actions like, defamation, various copyright fair use cases are famously that way. They never create precedent because each one is just a vibe check. So now that like kind of in the courts, nothing matters. Like any particular judge, depending on whether they're, depending on which cable news they like and what their personal feelings are, honestly, whether they use Android or iPhone, in this case, on their personal device, and how they feel about the green bubble issue. So the actual complaint itself matters way less, I think, than maybe, if not than it used to, then I think the general public was convinced that it used to matter. Like if you compare this to the complaint that kicked off the 10-year saga that was the Microsoft antitrust case, where they had the consent decree and they got the lawyers embedded and all this, and they were like, there are various injunctions preventing them from doing this or that until the final judgment. Then there's the settlement and all this back and forth. And the degree to which that was distracting to that company, sure. It all had an air of like, there are facts. We will discover those facts. And then a judge who is serious will determine based on various tests under the Section 2 of the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, like whether or not you are in violation. And I think whether that was really more serious and rigorous then, or whether society viewed it as such, the reputation of the courts, the federal courts in particular, the Supreme Court especially, is just in the toilet right now as trust in institutions across the country have eroded. Or it's just like our faith in the system is less, and therefore you can just write a complaint that reads like a fucking blog post of like that opens with Steve Jobs and a Kindle ad, and the executives at Apple not liking the fact that the Kindle software on the iPhone bought a book and then was opened on an Android and continued to work. They're like, oh, that's bad. Like normally. Maybe, sometimes in these complaints recently, like in the Google DOJ case, I think it opened with like a similar sort of volley, like a lead paragraph to kind of get you engaged. But this is like 10, 15 fucking pages of like really kind of like heavy handed. And maybe it's just because I'm close to it because like I follow the industry, but it was weird. Jason Snell, he used to be the EIC at the editor chief in Macworld. He wrote a good blog post. It's kind of his first reaction takes. This is going to be like a years long thing. So there's not really like a lot of point in diving in too much into the details. A few things were funny, like the DOJ taking credit for creating the iPod. Like it was here. They claimed that the case against Microsoft was, quote, a path clearing antitrust enforcement case brought by the United States and states attorneys general against Microsoft opened the market and constrained Microsoft's ability to prohibit companies like Apple from offering iTunes on Windows PCs. That is a stretch. Now, it's true that like Windows did various things to nerf QuickTime, and QuickTime is one of the supporting technologies in the whole iTunes story. I don't know if it was they also use the word monopoly, that word, based on the very, very popular board game. They're pretty loose in the use of the word monopoly and kind of like a colloquial way throughout the parts of the document that I read and skimmed. I don't know. This all feels like vibes. It's easy to get distracted, and I'm sure if you follow this stuff, you've probably seen various takes. They probably are mostly confirmation bias of like whatever people feel about stuff. They might be some predictions of how things are going to play out. I refuse to make a prediction because, again, everything in the modern day court system feels like a fucking dice roll. Also, if the administration changes hands to, somebody else and there's a different attorney general next year, who's to say that the case will even be continued or what valence it might take on? So instead, I think it's more useful as a news consumer to gird ourselves to look at the case because it's going to be big and it's going to be in the news and it's going to dominate tech news for a long time, I'm sure. And this is miserable because it's silly. What does an antitrust action, again, using like the Sherman Antitrust Act, like what should we be looking for to see if they made the case? And really, in my I'm not a lawyer sense, I think it kind of boils down to four things. Like one, DOJ or whoever's bringing the complaint has to like define a market. What is the market that we're talking about here? That was a huge struggle in DOJ's case against Google. That was another huge struggle in the FTC's case against Microsoft trying to block the Activision acquisition. For example, a good example of market definition where like the plaintiff or complainant needs to define a market as sort of just table stakes to determine standing, to determine like, what percentage of that market does a company potentially fill? Like, it's an entree to figure out, do they have a monopoly? In 2007, when Whole Foods was sued by the FTC because they wanted to acquire Wild Oats, it's like, I drove by a Wild Oats once. We had one in Columbus, I think, and it was such an off-putting name. I never would have gone into a store called Wild Oats because I was already married. They brought that complaint, and what's the market there, right? Especially in 2007, like Whole Foods. What is Whole Foods? What are, if you want to make them out to be a monopoly, what market are they in? You can't say grocery stores, right? Because like they're an itty bitty player like, compared to Kroger, compared to, really any grocery store you've ever heard of, I'm sure, was bigger than Whole Foods in 2007. So they defined the relevant market as, quote, premium, natural, and organic supermarkets. Now, I am sure that Whole Foods had some memos and emails and marketing documents that segmented what kind of grocery store they were. But, that's the kind of boundary that you have to draw in order to make the next statement, which is step 2 in making a case of identifying a monopoly position. So, if we draw the market that way, then we can say that in the US, maybe, I don't know what number the FTC landed on. Maybe you could say Whole Foods has a 70% market share, and therefore that's often cited as 75% is sort of the threshold for a dominant monopoly player and can be treated like a monopoly without a lot of other factors, that might worsen the standing of the, defendant. So yeah, that's one that, in this case, the defined market is sort of silly. It's fair game to define a market, not in terms of sales. Like like if I was talking about bananas, I think that'd be the easier thing. It's like if I sell 20% of all the bananas in the country, but let's say my bananas cost a lot more. Maybe it's $10 a bunch. And additionally, my bananas are all 5 inches or longer. And let's say hypothetically, most bananas are 4 inches or less. And they wanted to bring a suit against me. They could say, well, in the market of well-endowed bananas, you have a monopoly. And even if in absolute terms, I'm only selling, say, 40% of the well-endowed bananas, if I'm charging way more, they could say you have a monopoly because you're making 70% of the revenue in the well-endowed banana market. And that would be, okay, sure. So you've defined the market, the well-endowed banana market. Now, did any customer ever walk into a grocery store and be like, damn it, I need some girthy bananas right now? No, that is probably not, you know what? It's a big country. I won't say it's never happened, but I would say that like on average, customers probably don't walk into grocery stores trying to plan their day around like just whether they can get their mouse around these bananas. And so they think of bananas as, hey, look, there's some how green or yellow are they is probably the most that are they organic or not? Those are the segments that the customers think about. So whenever you're like forcing yourself to define a market that is at odds with how customers would see it, that's when these sorts of like cases start to seem kind of over torqued to me. So, but hey, okay. DOJ defines a market here. In this case, they call it performance smartphones. And they don't really define performance smartphones clearly. They just keep referring to it. They say, hey, they're made of premium materials like glass. They have faster chipsets. They point out things like they're more expensive. The more expensive smartphones are usually associated with postpaid plans like Verizon, T-Mobile, like their main flagship carriers and not necessarily their prepaid plan carriers like Boost Mobile or Visible, also owned by, T-Mobile and Verizon, but they attract customers from a lower socioeconomic status, often with less good credit, who might not qualify for or be able to commit to multi-year contracts in order to get and this is an important point in their case, in the DOJ's case, as many incentives to buy the higher end smartphone in terms of rebates and so forth. So performance smartphones, that's the market. Now, like when I go shopping for a smartphone, do I think like I want to buy a performance smartphone? No. I happen to think, do I want to buy a flagship, like the best kind? Yes. So like it's not a wildly inappropriate way to segment it, I don't think, because I think customers do know whether they want a good smartphone or a whatever phone is cheapest smartphone. And additionally, they chose to mark it up by revenue, right? Because obviously Apple's average sale price is super high. $15.99 is like the max of the maxed out phone. It's so doing it by revenue instead of by unit sales makes sense if you want to make them out to be big. And they say that's they identify that now that they've drawn the little line, that is a monopoly position because it's more than 70% of the performance smartphone market. So they've done step one, define the market. They've done step two, they identified the monopoly position. Step three, they prove abuse of that position. Either abuse of the position to maintain the monopoly position, or they demonstrate a conspiracy to expand it or enrich themselves in some way that leverages their monopoly status, right? Like something like that. Like there's gotta be some wrongdoing, some ill will. They can't, it's not a crime just to be successful because you're selling the best thing and you're doing it all above board and you're not doing anything anti-competitive. Most of the prior art in that section is locking out competitors or colluding with competitors. In their case, they throw a lot. It's a shotgun approach. They cover a lot of stuff. They talk about, the 30% that Apple makes on sales and then again on subscriptions. Of course, in real life, how many apps these days are paid apps that also then have in-app purchases? Typically it's one or the other, and typically it's only in-app purchases. But like they're staking their claim. They're trying to make maximum. So they say like, quote, Apple demands up to 30% of the price of an app whose content, product, or service it did not create. And then when a consumer wants to buy some additional service within that app, Apple extracts up to another 30%, which makes it sound like, wow, that's 60%. If you're just kind of like skimming it. But in reality, like I can't even think of an app that was a paid app that then had a significant revenue stream that was also paid. They also point to, so that's an argument that the App Store rent collection is usurious. And that's fair, especially because you can't sideload, you can't install other app stores. They say the suppression of the cloud gaming, the streaming of cloud games, where that was not allowed unless you went through App Store review for each and every game on the service, which of course would have been onerous. They've recently, like, Apple has allowed this now. They just changed the policy a month ago. So I don't know if like this complaint was too far along for them to just moot that out and say it's no longer a live issue. But when these things take 10 fucking years and one of your 5 big pieces is already mooted by a policy change at the company, preemptively probably, because they probably had some kind of conversations or whispers about what was happening and they knew this was not the hill to die on. That could be the case. But one funny thing about the way the DOJ phrases it, and this is why it's just like, it's not a opinion of whether it's good or not that the DOJ brought this action. It's definitely not a prediction whether they're going to win. It's just, they use the phrase, suppressing cloud streaming games harms users by denying them the ability to play high compute games. That is not the thing that's preventing users from playing high compute games. Now, it's true that if you have a shitty Android tablet, you're not going to play any high compute games. I've never used that phrase to describe a game, but like I take it to mean that like on shitty hardware, you're going to get shitty frame rates and bad graphics. Apple at this point, they're packing a fucking, like if you buy an iPhone 15 Pro, like it is a powerful system. It can play console quality games on that resolution. It'll get hot. Your battery will get burned down. Those could be sold, and Apple, dutifully every year or two, like signs up some publisher to prove that it's possible, like they often do with Capcom and the Resident Evil series. So like that happened, and there's a $60 game, and you can buy it in theory. But because those don't make any money, because no one is actually wanting to play a AAA console style experience on a phone screen, pay that money up front, and then use a controller to look at a little tiny thing when they could on a bigger screen or in a different context. When they're on that screen, they want to play Clash of Clans or Candy Crush or whatever, and then feed it way more money over the long term by paying for in-app purchases. So it's just like, that's a market reality. The cloud streaming games preventing users from playing the high compute games. Like the reason they can't do that on the phones is that like all the publishers know they wouldn't make any money with that traditional model by just selling the games on the phones. And the cloud streaming, like xCloud, Xbox's cloud streaming, NVIDIA, GeForce Now, those were all like an end run around that 30% tax, but also around the reality that like phone users, the big juicy market, unlike hardcore AAA gaming fans who will pay up front for specialty consoles every 5 or 6 years and will pay up front $70, $80 and then also pay for a bunch of DLC for each and every game. They know that the average person needs it to be free to play or a low cost subscription like a video streaming service. So it's an end run around paying Apple. But it's also an acknowledgement of the market reality that if they could have a low latency video stream delivered gaming experience where you like some kind of controller was talking straight to the cloud or you're using the phone to control the game, like that would align with their business model better than going to the trouble of shipping all these games natively one at a time into an app store or even into a super app, the phrase that'll come up later, and making them run well on the device. So like whether it's cloud or not is like way more about the market dynamics of gaming, not the market dynamics so much of the app store. Meaning of gaming on the app store as like, what consumers have voted that they want, because it's not like we're seeing a ton of high compute games in the Android space outside of a small number. And it's not that these companies haven't built cloud gaming systems that work on Android. And like a lot of them work pretty well on Safari as progressive web apps. Like, it's just like the market isn't really real or significant. So it's interesting that they chose to highlight it. I think the reason that they did is that they're trying to paint a picture of analogizing all of this to what happened in the 90s with Internet Explorer and Windows, and how, with the benefit of hindsight, they see themselves as the heroes in the story that decoupled the operating system from the web browser. And then the web browser became the platform for communication, commerce, and now even application development. And they want to do the same thing to iOS and break up the OS to app layer so that developers can deliver native applications free of the control of the platform holder. And the cloud gaming story supports that, because if the games are happening in the cloud and you're just a client to the games, then the platform holder offers almost no value in that as a middleman that's going to inject themselves. And it signals to the reader or to whoever's listening to this complaint that Apple's really just sort of injecting themselves in to collect rent from the participants in the market, which I think is smart. Like it's a smart strategy that is made completely moot by the fact that Apple has already reversed this and said, hey, cloud gaming services can be in the App Store and you don't have to pay to be in the App Store, right? You're like a reader app, you're like Netflix or whatever. You can't, if you're going to have people sign up in the app, you've got to pay us. But like that's, existing subscribers could download and use it. And Microsoft I think, strategically has said, oh, that's not good enough. We're not going to do it, because they want this to be a live issue, both for the purposes of extracting as much leverage as they can in the DMA fights that Apple's going through in Europe. And I suspect that they probably also have a couple people on the inside who knew that this that this complaint was working its way through the bureaucratic nightmare of the Department of Justice. And I suspect this might have actually started at the FTC, because a lot of this reads more like Lena Khan than it reads like Merrick Garland. The FTC has bungled all of their cases so far so badly. And I say that as somebody just watching reporters who are our lawyers say, like, wow, Lena Khan talks a big game, but like, boy, has her FTC just like shat the bed on every single one of these cases strategically. This really looks like, oh man, like I got this complaint and there's all these attorneys generals at the state level. Like maybe the DOJ should play point. That's my take. There's other stuff here too that I just think is like, this is an airing of grievances now of just like individual aspects of the complaint. One of them was, quote, Apple makes third-party messaging apps on the iPhone worse generally and relative to Apple Messages, Apple's own messaging app, by prohibiting third-party apps from sending or receiving carrier-based messages. So what they're getting at, of course, is the fact that iMessage sits on top of SMS. And in a year from now, RCS, which will be encrypted and will actually address, this is also kind of mooted because Apple's already said we're going to support RCS. And John Gruber has reported that's because China told them that they had to. And RCS is encrypted and will support high resolution photos and stuff. All the things that they're complaining about will disappear once RCS support lands, probably in September. Maybe on a point release, so November, December next year, or later this year. Regardless, iMessage sits on top of SMS. It's promoted if you're talking to another phone or an email address with SMS or MMS as a text message, and it is registered with iMessage, Apple injects itself and promotes that message into, now it's going to be end-to-end encrypted and have all of the blue bubble features added on top. The funny thing is, other messaging apps, including on Android, which I believe has a hook that allows you to be the messaging app of record for the SMSs, for these carrier-based messages. All the other competition on Android that allows this sort of competition doesn't actually interface with carrier-based messages because it's a pain in the ass and there's not really like a lot of benefit to that. So it's a weird thing for them to focus on in the headline of talking about messaging. Like you look at WeChat, you look at WhatsApp, you look at Line, Facebook Messenger. Literally none of them intercept SMSs and register with the Android system as like the SMS, text recipient of record that's associated with the phone number, and then promotes their messaging on top because they don't need to, because it actually doesn't matter that much. So what matters instead is the network effect of who uses that messaging app. And it would have just been stronger to be like, yo, enough people in the US use iMessage that it creates this strong social effect. Maybe focus more in the headline level of how dominant it is with teens. So the consumer harm is really about bullying, say. I think it would have been a stronger case. Focusing on like the SMS and certainly with RCS coming, like all that just seems moot. So I don't know, man. I just don't work here. All right. I mentioned super apps a moment ago. I was familiar with this phrase, but I'm going to assume you're not. And then I'm just going to read how the DOJ complaint first introduces the topic. Quote, super apps provide a user with broad functionality in a single app. Super apps can improve smartphone competition by providing a consistent user experience that can be ported across devices. Suppressing super apps harms all smartphone users, including Apple users, by denying them access to high-quality experiences, and it harms developers by preventing them from innovating and selling products. If you don't know what a super app is, and you think it's just a, like, I don't know, like Super Nintendo was better than Nintendo, so I guess super apps are better than apps. That might sound bad. That might sound like, yeah, Apple, why are you withholding me from my super apps? But if you sit with it for a minute, so a lot of the reporting on this, has emphasized that super apps are all the rage in Asia. In different Asian countries, they all have their own super app, and that super app becomes more important than the iPhone operating system or the handset's operating system, because everyone's in the app and the app owns you. It's where all your payments are. It's where all your messaging is. It is where you find stuff. It's like you live in that app. And so the springboard, the iOS home screen, just exists to launch the super app, or maybe nowadays decorate with widgets that are generated from the super app that ports you in. And they make it sound, the media, as well as this complaint, make it sound like there's a whole bunch of these super apps and every Asian country's got one and it's dominant. Really, the only one that is super dominant is WeChat. And then Tata has an app in India too that's become quite dominant. And WeChat in China, because it was able to achieve network effect in China as the messaging platform that dominated everything. It was able to start adding on payments and adding on food delivery and adding on all these other things. And frankly, it exists now as an arm of the Communist People's Republic of China, like the party CCP, like surveillance state. At a time when Congress and even the executive branch, the administration, saying that they would sign the TikTok ban, is in like no small part because of China being a surveillance state. And when you look at WeChat and you look at Tata, both countries that heavily regulate this shit so that they can inject themselves as the state into how people use their phones, so that they can be surveilled, so that they can suppress free speech. It strikes me as weird in this particular moment when everyone's all hot about TikTok, but also like this moment as in the last 7 years of US China policy of beating the shit up out of them for all of their various human rights grievances and abuses. To hold up as an exemplar of the kind of innovation that they'd want to see in America of a super app. I read this and I immediately thought of Elon Musk saying he wants X to be a super app last year, which I suspect a non-zero number of the state's attorney general first heard the phrase super app from Elon Musk saying he wants Twitter to be a super app. He wants it to be the center of your financial life. All your banking runs through it. Your digital wallet. He wants it to be your messaging platform. He wants everything to be through X. Now, I think it's fantastical. In fact, the last time we had a social networking company in America that really did achieve network effect, they tried to make their app a super app. That was Facebook. And Facebook starts adding all kinds of other nonsense to the Blue app. It's the marketplace. It's the messenger. It's, you know, you might remember that era where Facebook had a home screen inside of the app, and it would launch into that home screen and it would show you all the different things that Facebook could do. And guess what? Users got overwhelmed. They hated it. The UX was shitty. The design language and everything was garbage. Like, turns out having an app launcher that launches a single app, that launches an app launcher that launches other apps, all so that some other guy can achieve the exact same kind of platform dominance and network effect so that they can turn the screws on you, is not something that users find particularly exciting or innovative. It's certainly something companies would like to be able to do. Facebook was trying. Elon would love to. I'm sure that, remember the Justice Department following that case 10 years ago after, when Apple refused to create a version of the operating system that would just unlock a shooter's phone for the FBI, the Department of Justice would love a backdoor, and a super app would be a great way to figure out try their luck with whoever owns the super app to create that backdoor. And so I suspect that all things being equal, it's unlikely that even if some company came around with a super innovative super app concept, which again, Apple, it does things to discourage it, like doesn't allow you to make apps that are actually multiple apps on the home screen, but kind of does with the widget system. I call me a conspiracy theorist, but I kind of feel like somebody in China put a thumb on the scale and accelerated the super appification of WeChat. And then somebody in modern day India, in both in their government as well as in their dominant, network provider, put a thumb on the scale to entice people into the super app ecosystem until it reached that sort of critical mass. And so that's a weird prescription to solve the very specific problem of it's mildly inconvenient to switch between Android and iOS. This sounds like the cure being, a lot worse than the ailment in the first place. It's just so weird they brought this up. And I couldn't help but think that they brought it up to catch Elon's attention, because all of the career DOJ people, and I suspect FTC people, who worked on this thing, who are going to be there next January, regardless of who wins the next election, they probably have invested a lot into this project. I think discovery is going to be bananas. I think this case could go on for 8, 9, 10 fucking years. If they can signal to a right-wing nut job that's super influential in the right-wing media ecosystem that he has a selfish benefit in not shitting on this complaint, because, generally Republicans are anti-regulatory, generally they're pro-corporation. But if Elon sees dollar signs and I could be a super app, they want to give me my thing, maybe Elon will go easy on us. Maybe we'll get lucky. He'll even tweet in support. And then, this is my, not to get too political here, but Merrick Garland seems like a guy who's way more concerned with the appearance of fairness than actual fairness. He wants to look above the fray, wants to be perceived by, especially elites, as being, fair to both sides and bipartisan, more than actually fair in doling out justice, which seems like it's a good modus operandi for a press secretary and maybe less good for somebody who's the nation's top cop, because sometimes one side is wrong and needs to be policed. So this just seems like talking out both sides of your mouth here. It doesn't look good to me. I don't like it. I don't like it. There, I said it. The last thing is they emphasize digital wallets a lot, and boy howdy, it's they in the top line complaints they don't talk about NFC at all. They don't talk about the tap to pay. They do bring it up plenty later. But here's how they open it. They say, let's see, pull this up. They say digital wallets are an increasingly important way that smartphones are used and are a product in which users develop a great deal of comfort and trust, as they typically contain users' most sensitive information. Digital wallets that work across smartphone platforms allow users to move from one smartphone brand to another with decreased frictions. So first of all, this is Justin again. Frictions, as a noun that can be pluralized, is something that our government just did. And I feel like I want to bring a complaint that they just did this to the language that I hold so dear. In fact, now I suddenly support legislation to make English a national language in the United States so that we can finally bring the real criminals to justice with decreased frictions, among other things. Back to the quote. Ugh. Apple has denied users access to digital wallets that would have provided a wide variety of enhanced features and denied digital wallet developers. I love this. Often banks, the opportunity to provide advanced digital payment services to their own customers. Boy, howdy, does it sound like a lot of banks and maybe Kroger and Walmart said, yo, the tap to pay thing, not only do I not want to pay Apple 0.15%, but I don't want to pay the credit card providers anything for debit cards or for credit cards. I don't want any swipe fees. I don't want any of these transaction fees. What I want is to be able to go into that wallet app or otherwise communicate with the NFC chip so that you can pay for shit directly out of your Chase bank account. Because, like, of course, the ACH, the automated clearinghouse system in the US for moving money between bank accounts is like not designed for individual granular transactions. But if Chase makes a wallet app, they could insulate you from that by having their own basically like payment network that doesn't end run around the whether it's a card processor or in this case Apple skimming off the card processors. That's what this is really about. And if you've ever, I remember when Kroger tried really hard. I was living in Ohio, so I walked to the Kroger all the time, and everyone was finally going tap to pay. Not Kroger. If you wanted to check out, you had to go open up the shitty Kroger app, give it your routing and checking account numbers, register all that, do the whole, I think even like the, give me the amounts of these two less than $1 deposits to verify that you own the account. And then you had to pull up a barcode, scan the barcode, and then you'd pay with the barcode. And you would get, I don't know, an extra penny of Kroger gas savings or one if you gas up at the Kroger. Clearly, that was an opportunity for the banks, which, as we know, are the real little guy, and the massive retailers that, like, as we know, have profited greatly from all of the inflation scare of the last few years. They're the ones harmed here, right? Because they don't get to inject themselves in the middle. And yet, if you read the complaint, it's all framed as like an Apple's taking people's personal information and injecting themselves as the middleman. I was like, well, you should go and talk to the state of Delaware about this credit card industry thing, because boy, like that also takes a little bit of customer information, but it creates lubrication between the transactions and the banks. Like, I would much rather trust Apple with all of that stuff and the transaction level stuff, like than any of the banks personally. But I get it. At the same time, no one else is allowed to use the NFC chip. And the NFC chip is what powers the really, really convenient tap, tap, beep, boop, tap to pay. And if I was a bank, I would want that. But when you read the actual text of these digital wallets, they're like, oh man, they could have provided them so many innovative financial innovations to innovate with, and people would have had these features. And like, tell me more about these features and how they're not just the bank being able to remove 1.8% in costs on every transaction or pay less in terms of like reward credit card, stuff. Like, whew, it's getting pretty stretchy out there. All right. So that was, I spent a lot of time there because that's the bulk of the case. You got to prove that abuse of the position or of the monopoly position, or that, some conspiracy is afoot to suppress competition, to entrench the monopoly. And that's where, they threw a lot of spaghetti at the wall. It took a half an hour just to talk through it. Step 4, if you want to get anywhere, especially in modern day, governance in the court's jurisprudence, or, I wanted to use the word jurisprudence, but I didn't want to sound like an ass, but I also wasn't 100% sure exactly if that's what I mean here, but I think it is. Recent court cases that bring up the Sherman Antitrust Act sure as shit seem to be focused on demonstrating that customers were harmed and defining that harm solely based on whether the customer is paying more or paying less. Because like, it wasn't that long ago, it was 10 years ago when Amazon was basically pricing every traditional book publisher out of business with the way that they were slashing prices on Kindle books to $9.99 and locking that in, and then paying an agency model, and you just kind of get what you get as the publisher, and you wouldn't be able to set prices, and you couldn't set prices higher elsewhere. And it was all designed to weaken the publishing industry to the point where, hell, people would just publish through Amazon or independently publish. And like Amazon did spin that into like a story of like, look at how we're enabling all these independent publishers. But that was the monopoly that Amazon had over ebooks, and they were abusing it to corner that market, to reduce competition and to break down sort of like that industry so that they could be subservient. And what happened was I believe it was the DOJ brings a case against Apple for anti-competitive price fixing by working with the publishers to actually let the publishers set the prices of their books. And because those prices were higher than what Amazon was charging in the Kindle store, I'm doing the Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man thing here now. Like, they just got the wrong guy. And Apple lost the case, and they had to change how they priced the books, and the iBooks project was basically dead at that point. It's sort of on life support now. Like it's around. It's a way to buy a book, but boy, like the courts really have been, and maybe we will see a reversion to the mean here, and we're actually going to get a major antitrust case that doesn't hinge on whether or not consumers paid a penny more or less as a result of all of this stuff. But we haven't seen a lot of evidence for it yet. And if this complaint is so kind of loosey-goosey and, light on smoking guns, there's a lot of really damning looking quotes and emails. Maybe that'll be enough of Apple executives, clearly stating that they're trying to, wall off their garden. But it's the logical leap that you have to jump through to make it so that all of this redounds to customers paying more is hard. Here's the quote in the summary of their opening. Apple inflates the price for buying and using iPhones while preventing the development of features like alternative app stores, innovative super apps, cloud streaming games, and secure texting. Like, 3 of those 4 things are bullshit. One is so alternative app stores, it's true, they don't let you do that. And maybe they should. And we're going to see how that plays out in Europe. And maybe the US should pass a law that allows app stores. The innovative super apps, like, they're not innovative. You're just changing who the gatekeeper is from the OS level to an app level. It's moving the goalposts. It's not making any sort of substantive change. Cloud streaming games is moot because they're allowed now under the same rules that video streaming are, and no one has a problem with that. And secure texting, which is, that first of all, RCS is coming, so that's also moot. But like, depending on how you define text, there's billions of ways to send in end-to-end encrypted messages on iPhones without using Apple's stuff. So, okay, that was the crescendo. If you didn't hear it, if you didn't hear the gongs clashing together, that's the end of the beginning of the complaint that's introing all this. So the harm, they inflate the price for buying and using iPhones. Like, I think that if I'm Apple, I would produce what I'm sure are reams and reams and reams of documentation saying that they have been locked in at a 40% margin profit. Just like I talked about Nintendo earlier, right? Nintendo starts with the margin that they want to make, and then they back into how much they're going to budget for development, distribution, and marketing, so that if the game sells as they would predict, they'll hit the margin. Apple is even more maniacally focused, and they say it on every fucking quarterly call that I've ever listened to. We target 40% gross margin. Gross? Either gross or net margin, I don't remember, on every single product. And they have for over 20 years. They have before they were a massive market player. In fact, That number has gone down a little bit because as you scale up, it is hard to keep up those margins. But they expressly have not done a lot of the things that you might do, like price gouge or price fix or collude, to try to crank it above 40%. Instead, they just try to grow the size of the pie, and now they're focused on services. But like, they're still trying to get, maybe the top line, right? Like the top level iPhones get a little bit more expensive each year, but like, they're still kind of tracking inflation. They're not getting 50, 60, 70% profit margins on these phones. So when you say that they're inflating profit margins when they've been locked at a 40% margin, and they can choose how much shit goes into the phone and how nice it is, but like if they're upgrading the material such that the margins are staying the same and people keep buying them and customer sat is still 99, 98% for users, like you got to be really like specific about how the prices are getting inflated when like Apple is so just mechanically, they've optimized the whole company around hitting that 40% number. Every product it starts that way, and it started that way long before they had any sort of powerful position in any real meaningful market. So, boy, that's about it. Honestly, I feel like they, if I was Mr. DOJ, I would have done this totally backwards. The other big piece that I forgot to talk about was smartwatches. That was the other piece of the complaint, but I'd rather talk about it here because I think that the whole case should have been based on the smartwatch market. Apple utterly fucking crushes the smartwatch market. I said smartwatch market. The Apple Watch dominates all the revenue, all the profit, almost all the unit sales. Tablets too, but like I think the watch, you could make a really good case if you, instead of going after the iPhone, which is the glitziest product, it's the one everyone knows, everyone has a smartphone, so everyone has some skin in the game. I think as a piece of politics, of course you go after the iPhone. The watch is a toy. Why are we going after the watch? Does it really matter? Because, in my opinion, you've got a way better case that Apple is using its privileged position in a relatively dominant of the high scale, high end phone market to sell Apple Watch and give Apple Watch things that no other watch could have. And that is part of their case. Maybe that's the only part that stands up. But like I feel like it's the cause and effect are backwards. I would start with, what is the market? The market is smartwatches. What is, the monopoly position? It's obvious. Apple dominates the smartwatch market, almost no matter how you slice it. What is the abuse? Well, for something that small with that limited of a battery, you can't do everything on the device, and you can't do everything over Wi-Fi radios or cellular radios. Low energy Bluetooth is so much more efficient that like you can't really make a competitive smartwatch without a privileged connection to something that has an always on internet connection and is on your body all the time, which, guess what, is a smartphone. So by giving Apple Watch that privileged connection to the iPhone, but allowing no other smartphone that same privilege, and they go into a lot of stuff like the quick replies and the OS level stuff, like just talking about connectivity and battery life, you could make a great case that fundamentally a competitor who wants to build a smartwatch cannot sell it to anyone who has an iPhone. If it's going to be competitive on battery, if it's going to be competitive on other features, because it needs that like low energy Bluetooth connection to even function for more than a few hours. Or it needs to be goddamn, and you've seen some of these, right? The big circular, like just wall wart Samsung phones or watches that take up the whole front of the wrist, like a gauntlet. That would have been I think that case would be slam dunk. And the remedy would just be like, hey, knock it off. And then they'd have to build some sort of transport API. Maybe that juice wasn't worth the squeeze for them and they wanted to go for the bigger target here. But that seems like a layup compared to just this scattershot approach. But hey, what do I know? I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a guy with an audio file. All right. let's call it there. I'm sure there's going to be more of this DOJ nonsense, and I will not engage every time it comes up because it's what the fuck. It's not worth more of our time. Recommendations. Stuff I'm doing. So I finished, as I mentioned earlier, Cyberpunk 2077. So I needed a new game to play. I immediately picked up Dave the Diver. A lot of people, if you haven't heard of it, it is a bimodal game. It's not an independent game, but it's a smaller game. It is made by Nexon, I think a Korean firm. And it's got a fun, lighthearted style. It's a pixel arty. It has a kind of sense of humor that is evocative of Katamari Damacy. So very kind of like, what would you call it? Like irreverent, like very silly humor almost. But it's very stylistic. And you spend half your, one mode of the game is you are a diver in a scuba thing in this deep ocean hole in the middle of this lake, and you just dive in and you go and you catch fish and you go on adventures and you rescue dolphins, and there's the whole story. There's a whole progression of what you can do and unlock new gear and new depths and all that. The other mode is each night there's a sushi restaurant that you are helping bootstrap, and you are a server in the sushi restaurant, and you also help manage the restaurant. And that ends up kind of being more like manic, run back and forth, run food to customers. And that's sort of like a mini game. It's interesting. It combines a couple components of games that I really like. Like, honestly, the Dave the Diver, the diver portions reminded me of this game I played in elementary school called Odell Lake. I don't know if anyone here knows Odell Lake, but you played I think a little fish, and then you would find bigger fish, and maybe not eat them or something, but you'd kind of get increasingly big, and you'd interact with all these different things. And it was you'd learn about our ocean friends. That's kind of the vibe because it's so chill and the music is so nice. There are dangers. There's action, so to speak, but it's all right. I don't know. It doesn't light my hair on fire. The restaurant component, though, it reminds me a lot of what I like about Cook Serve Delicious, but which is a game where you make a menu and then you have to go through all of the steps of whatever the recipe is. You want 3 different kind of ice creams. You need to put nuts on this one, or chocolate sauce and whipped cream on this one. You got to hit all the right buttons to make each item correctly to serve it up. I find that way more engaging than the kind of mini game of run back, pour some hot tea, run back, get some. Deliver the thing deliver this dish to the first person who asked for this dish, or if you get in the wrong order, then the customer will get mad and they'll get up and walk away. It's just not that. I'm falling off pretty quick. I don't know. I put a few hours into it. It's fine. Like I said, it's definitely not a AAA game, right? It's pixel art. It's unless the game loop is extremely enjoyable, it's just hard for me to give a fuck. Oh, cool, I got a cutscene that looks kind of crappy. Neat. I'm not going to get attached to these characters, right? So if the game loop isn't satisfying in its own right, why would I keep playing it? I started watching the Halo television series. I'm all caught up in the latest episode 8 or 9 or whatever. It just came out of season 2. Season 1 got really panned in the YouTube press. The fans got angry. I think because it wasn't a beat for beat, just recitation of a game plot. Season 2, I don't follow this shit. I don't care. If you've played any Halo games, the TV show is Halo flavored sci-fi. There you go. Is it a way to pass time on this celestial rock as it spins and rotates around a sun, as age slowly saps our bodies of energy, and the telomerase in our cells gets shorter and shorter with each division of those cells as we inch closer to death? Yes. It 100% makes that time go by a little faster. And so I watched it, and it was fine. I don't know, man. Like, prestige TV shows have just reached this level of, oh, wow, yeah, that looks like a movie. All right. Like, I don't know if it's just desensitized me to media, but I'm not getting nearly as much out of it as I used to, except for just a tiny handful of programs that obviously had a lot of tender love and care in them. And the problem is, and I'm sure if you're an executive at a media company, the problem is if you're just looking at comps left and right and pitches left and right, it's like, well, that looks like that, so that should work. And that fits all these demographics. And that should, our data engineers say that people who like this actor also really like cronuts. So let's do a baking contest with John Cena in, unhealthy baked goods, right? Like, if you're trying to be mechanical about it and you give a shit as a viewer, like, there's just, I don't know. It's fine. But the Halo flavored Halo was Halo flavored enough that when I fell off Dave the Diver, I started playing Halo Infinite's campaign again. Which I didn't beat last time, and which is like not a good Halo campaign because there's not a lot of story. You just kind of go from checkpoint to checkpoint to clear things on your map. It feels like Far Cry, but Halo. And I think I made myself sad. Only other recommendation this week. There's a show called Another Life, which I'm sure got canceled because it's not very good. 2019 stars Katee Sackhoff. She played Starbuck in Battlestar Galactica. And if you didn't watch Battlestar Galactica, her character as the spunky, rebellious fighter pilot would very often go off in solo adventures, often in a ship with like a crew of other people who are like not on board with whether it was a religious conspiracy or to go pick up her boyfriend. Like, there's just several multi-episode arcs in that series where Starbuck, played by Katee Sackhoff, is like leading a ship of people in space to run an errand. And those people on the ship fucking hate her because she's not managing the situation particularly well. And she's single-mindedly focused on just what she wants. Somebody at Netflix was like, hey, what if we made a TV show starring Katee Sackhoff helming a ship where the whole crew is actually loyal to this other guy who just got demoted at the last minute. And they got to go run an errand. And hijinks will ensue. So if you miss Battlestar Galactica, I guess, that is another way to pass the time. I'm a few episodes in, and it's just like, I feel it's like soap opera lighting and bad writing. And it's like a whole bunch of 20-somethings that are too attractive and wearing too much makeup to pass as astronauts. And I think halfway through the pilot, they realized like, hey, we've got a lot of sexy co-eds here without a lot of science skills who are kind of talking really informally. And there's not a clear chain of command. Like, I don't think like, is it a science expedition? Is it a military thing? Is it just like a random gaggle of humans on a ship where, like, in sci-fi, a random gaggle of humans with kind of like pretty mundane job roles can totally work. Like, the movie Alien is that, and it's fucking awesome. This is no Alien. This is like a CW show. I didn't watch any of these, but like, if I guess a similar dated thing to the Battlestar Galactica reboot series. This is like One Tree Hill in space meets Starbuck from Battlestar Galactica on a ship. So there's a non-zero number of you is like, yeah, I'll watch that. And that's why I'm here, man. Here to talk to you about Another Life, which I hope didn't get picked up for more than one season because I want all of those people to go on and have good careers or successful. Although 2020 was a hell of a year, so I hope they got to keep their jobs. Mailbag time. Let's be quick about it. William says, please could you talk more about the X-Real Air 2s that you mentioned all the way back in version 1? I balk at the price of Apple Vision, but I could be convinced at the X-Real's price point. I'm primarily coming from a coding/media consumption angle. How does it compare to Apple Vision along these dimensions? Thanks, William. William, thanks for writing in. So if you don't know, the X-Real Air 2s, the best way to think about them is they are sunglasses that happen to have little postage stamp sized monitors in each eye that are mirrored in each eye. And you can just plug them into they have a USB-C cable that jacks into them, and you can jack that into a computer, and then bingo bango, it is a monitor on your face. It doesn't use screen sharing. It shows up on the operating system as a monitor. It's a 1080p resolution, so it's not Retina. It doesn't fill up your whole field of view. Can you code on it? Yes, I can code on it, but it requires me to jack the font up and only have one small thing on the screen at once. Have be tabbed between a terminal and color reproduction is actually pretty good for the constraints. For $399, I think it's a great deal. Especially if you have any postural issues, like if your neck hurts working at a computer for a long time, if you are hunched over a laptop, if you're in a really bright setting, often like I am here in Florida and trying to work outdoors where the laptop screens are garbage, it comes with little horse blinders that go over the top and significantly dim what you see beyond those little glasses screens. So the projected screen is way more visible. All that stuff is great. They got little cute speakers in there, the audio leaks because you got nothing covered, plug in your ears, but you could totally watch a movie. And that's primarily how they've marketed it. I use it as a sort of ergonomics device. But yes, I've replaced it with the Vision Pro because the Vision Pro is so much better at filling your field of view. It's higher resolution. It's sharper. I can use the logical pixel points on the Vision Pro are bigger than on the 13-inch MacBook Air itself, such that when I open the 13-inch MacBook Air, everything shrinks down. Whereas when I come from the X-Real Air 2s and then I open the MacBook Air display, take off the sunglasses, everything is bigger, right? So it's a really dramatic difference in resolution. But, if you only want to pay a few $100s, give it a try, especially if you can return them. I'm glad they exist, and I think there will be more products like this as we see over the next decade a convergence between the VR headset that wishes it was an AR thing on one end of the spectrum and the AR glasses that wishes it was a VR headset at the other. At some point, they're going to Benjamin Button in the middle. We're nowhere near that, but it does... you can play it ahead a couple years and you can assume that the X-Real 4s, or if some other company enters in, like Meta might, could be really a lot better. Talking about eyeballs. Pulling up another email that was eyeball related. Vlad writes in. Vlad wrote a lot of interesting thoughts. But one I want to touch on, he said, you mentioned in version 5 that your eyesight is not too bad. It's true. Thank you. I'm very blessed to have 20/20 vision so far, although increasing amounts of eye strain. And I will say that my, is it cornea? Is it retina? My ability to focus in the morning is getting worse and worse. This is blurry in the morning and it takes 40 minutes or so for me to wake up and be able to see well. That worries me. Back to the quote. Considering the large amount of technical people with glasses, what do you think keeps your vision intact? Genetics? Looking away from the screen every 20 minutes? Large font sizes to avoid strain? Probably all the above. I don't like sitting in front of a monitor at the same distance all day long. And I think I can thank all of my back issues and how uncomfortable my body is when I sit in one place for a long time. I can thank that for the reason I get up so much. I move around. I'm constantly moving between my desktop and working outside on a laptop and now using the Vision Pro and going to different places and trying different heights. And I'm always moving around. So those breaks are built into just how I use a computer. Whereas I see some people who are more than content not really budging for 10 hours. Genetics, I'm very fortunate. 23andMe has told me that I've got storms a brewing, and I have inherited all of the alleles that really fucked my grandparents, vision wise in their older age. So I'm kind of here to like, make hay while the sun shines and get my computer use in now, because I might not be able to see the screen, barring any medical improvements, especially in dry macular degeneration, if anyone wants to talk about that. Large font sizes, I'm going to be honest. Some number of you, somebody is still listening to this. Hello, hi. You're a programmer, or you work at a computer screen, and you have teeny tiny font, and it fills up just a tiny portion of the screen. And you will spend a lot of time just looking at that tiny portion of the screen, squinting your eyes, and maybe it doesn't feel like you're straining them, but you're straining them. And you could, if you wanted to, make it just 10 times bigger and fill up the whole fucking screen. And you'd still be able to read it just as fast. And you'd be navigate it just as fast because you're navigating with your keyboard or whatever. And you'd be effortless to see it. In fact, at a glance, you would know exactly what you're looking at, and you would never have to strain your eyes. Why would anybody? If you're writing code, you have the added benefit now of you have a limiting constraint where if you jack up your font such that the width of your screen can only fit 80 characters. I'm serious. That's big screen. That's big font. Then that is a liberating constraint because it'll prevent you from writing very, very long lines of code, which are a smell that you're packing in too much logic without a lot of the expository explanation of variable names and structuring things in a way that are more readable. So I have the idiot bar on the right side of the 80 character line, and I just hit Command plus in my editor until that bar lines up with the right side of the screen. And then I hard wrap all of my prose that I write, and I try to keep my code to 80 characters whenever possible. And it's such good feedback. Like, even if you're writing all your methods in a way that's very expressive and you're not writing really long lines, it also prevents you from writing deeply nested code listings where maybe you have 4, 5, 6 levels of indentation and now each line has to be shorter in order to hit that 80 characters. It's a gentle feedback that hey, maybe I've got too much nesting here and I should extract this out into a first class unit of code. Unnest this, unwrap this, unpack it, make it more direct, less indirect. So I'm a big advocate for big font sizes. I did it because I didn't want to strain my eyes because I feel it and it seems dumb to do that. But I work with so many people. I've worked with so many people. I've shoulder surfed so many people. And I look at their teeny tiny fonts and I'm like, you can only read one thing on the screen at a time, right? If I see you only interacting with 20% of the pixels on the screen, you're actually the one who's making less use of your monitor than me, who's lighting up all the pixels and they're changing all the fucking time. So that's my take. Thanks for the question, Vlad. Oh boy, I got a couple. I'm gonna do one more. Prem writes, now that you mentioned about using AVP, famously AVP stands for Alien versus Predator, although lately some people have been using it to abbreviate the Apple Vision Pro. Now that you mentioned about using AVP day to day for development, would you mind talking about it more from your development setup? Do you pretty much mirror your Mac display to AVP and run your editor terminal browser there, or do you run an SSH client to your machine so that you can have multiple windows around you? Well, I've mentioned this before, so this is going to be a short one. Yes, I just mirror the Mac screen and I just use it, and then I have music up to my left playing. Although lately with the television app, I often have a little cute television playing a YouTube embed of music. I so far haven't introduced anything into that setup that breaks anything out of the Mac display, but I am eager to, for what it's worth. If I could get I won't be so bold as to wish for a terminal that I could actually run code on the Vision Pro, but if I could get a terminal that was SSH'd into and made it relatively painless to have multiple tabs kind of constantly also connected to my Mac. I would love to have that sort of off in the corner, because I'm very often like, I'm glancing at my terminal and it's off to the side. I'd rather have a full screen editor in front of me and the terminal is glanceable as opposed to inside this one window. I'd also, because I test drive all my code in Safari. It's what I use as I develop all day when I'm making web applications. It would be pretty cool if and I could do this today. I just haven't gotten around to it. Actually, the reason I haven't gotten around to running a Safari window next to the Mac screen share window and using the app through the Vision OS version of Safari so that my editor can just be the full window in my Mac. The reason I haven't been doing that is because, frankly, the Vision OS version of Safari is kind of buggy and a little weird. It handles clicks and animations differently than the Mac. And I know a lot of people don't have the Vision OS or Vision Pro, so it would be weird for me to optimize for the 10 people who would ever do that. Additionally, the universal control flakes out all the time. And so if it's having a little conniption and I'm not able to click and drag and move around, like, who cares how fast my feedback loop is? Like, I'm just sitting around waiting for 30 seconds to put input into my browser. It's just too slow. So if it becomes more reliable, or if people build tools that can kind of, under the covers, talk to your Mac, or God forbid, run real development software, that would be neat. But yeah, for now, that's all I got. So thanks, Prem. I appreciate it. All right, that just about does us. I hope that you found this education to be conversational. Actually, you know what? I don't hope that you found this conversation to be educational, because, as mentioned earlier, I don't know shit about fuck, so to speak. I'm just commentating on what the commentators are commentating about this thing to comment on, especially as it pertains to the DOJ. Everything's going to play out and it's all going to be fine. And remember, everyone, the secret to happiness in life is to embrace the knowledge that nothing ever really changes. See you next time.